Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
The lesson I took from the story was always read through your lease/rental agreement fully before signing. This takes place 4 years ago in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm originally from California, so trading up city life for a less urban life was very challenging for me. Making friends was hard, but I made the move to be with my dad, who lived in an apartment complex with a roommate. My dad was a trucker, so he was gone for weeks at a time, while I was left alone to work and come home to a foreign place that I was slowly being accustomed to. My roommate was gone most of the time because he had a girlfriend, and he would leave his dog with me, so I never truly felt alone. I had an old lady for a neighbor that would come up and check on me too. That's how people were in that area, and I found it kinda nice how people knew their neighbors. I got to know everyone in my building's name after about 6 months of living there, except one. There was a man, I'd say in his early to mid-50s, who lived directly below my apartment. He looked, for lack of a better description, like a creep. He was balding except for on the sides of his head, which that hair was straggly too. He was tall and kinda skinny, had outdated 90s glasses, and a thick mustache. He was the only person in the building who wasn't friendly, or at least didn't make the effort to say hello or introduce himself to me. He also happened to be the maintenance man for all 5 buildings. I didn't think much of this at first. I honestly don't care if you're overly friendly to me. I enjoy having space of my own, and sometimes being too friendly is suspicious to me. That's just a personal problem, but I'm explaining why I didn't send up any red flags at first. One day when I was pulling out of the driveway to go to work in the morning, I noticed across the large lawn that led to the door to our buildings, the maintenance man was standing in the center, staring directly at me. Stare is the wrong word, more like glare. At first, I looked around confused, thinking perhaps he was looking at someone or something behind me. I was the only one there. Although a bit creeped out, I shrugged it off and continued with my day, forgetting all about it. The next day I was over at my neighbor Claire's apartment, the elder lady, and she happened to bring up a maintenance issue she had, but she mentioned that she would never ask the maintenance man for anything, and neither should I. I tried to ask her more about what she meant by that, but she ended up being very broad and said something along the lines of, "He's just a known creep around here." Fast forward to the first incident. It was around 2 AM and I was still awake, but only barely, sitting on the couch watching TV alone in the apartment. I was starting to drift off into sleep when I heard a soft noise near the front door. Thankfully, the show was very low in volume, because I normally don't pick up on quiet noises most of the time. I turned off the TV and began listening. Next to the living room on the right side is the patio area, and on the left is the kitchen and the front door. The light from the moon and outside lamps were flooding through the patio glass door, so I could see the doorknob to the front door moving, not just moving, but someone was using a key. In an instant, the door flung open and I was on my feet, with nowhere to hide at that point. I stood my ground and saw the silhouette step into the kitchen. That's when I saw it was the maintenance man. My stomach dropped and he stopped dead in his tracks when he spotted me, looking as if it was unexpected to find me awake. I noticed he had a large coat on, even though it wasn't winter or even cold that particular night. I noticed that only because the jacket looked bulky, as if he was carrying things in it that I couldn't see. "What are you doing?" was all I managed to squeak out. I was shaking, my knees feeling like they were about to give out. For reference, I was a 22-year-old woman standing a whopping 5'4", with no way to defend myself at all from where I was standing. He looked shocked, which made me feel like I had gained a little power from the situation. He retorted confusedly and angrily with, "Your toilet is making a loud noise that I could hear from my bedroom." I was angry and terrified, and only reacted with more anger when I saw him scrambling for excuses. "So you just let yourself into my apartment at 2 in the morning? I'm reporting this to management first thing in the morning." He stepped closer to me then. I backed up a few steps but still stood my ground, quickly turning on the light closest to me so he could see my fury. "The toilet is rumbling. I need to check it, now." Now I was trembling so hard I could barely stand. I had adrenaline and anger and fear all coursing heavily through my body. "Get out." He started to take the liberty to look around the kitchen where he was standing. My head immediately thought, what if he goes for a knife? And that's when he said it. "I can come in whenever I want." The sentence makes me shiver to this day. I didn't know what to do, and felt the power over the situation quickly dwindling down to a bad feeling that something bad was about to happen. "If you don't get out of my apartment now, I'm gonna start screaming as loud as I can." My voice was crackling and shaky, which made my heart drop into my stomach. I immediately felt like I was gonna be sick when he took yet another step forward towards me. "Check the lease. I could come in whenever I want. I'll see you later." He winked at me, creating a wave of nausea, and I felt faint. He slowly turned around and walked out, closing the door behind him and even going far enough as to lock it from the outside with his extra key. The next day, I contacted management as soon as their office opened. I could tell the conversation wasn't going anywhere when the manager sounded irritated right off the bat. When I told her that the guy entered my apartment illegally, she cut me off and told me that they do not allow any illegal activity. and take what I was saying very seriously. I thought, yes, I've got him, until the manager said, you can't just throw around accusations without proof. This man has dedicated over 20 years to working for this company, and we don't plan on getting rid of him anytime soon. Perhaps if you had read over your lease like you should have, yes, she was actually scolding me, you would have seen the clause that states that a maintenance worker has keys to the entire property, and if there is a maintenance issue, they are permitted to access the property at any time of day. This floored me. It couldn't possibly be legal, but of course I'm from California, and of course, I didn't read the lease carefully. When I moved there, my dad was already living in the apartment and I literally had nowhere else to go. So if I were to be living there, I was gonna have to sign the lease no matter what. So I did. Needless to say, nothing got done. Fast forward again, a few days go by and I don't see Mr. Maintenance Freak until I do. This time I'm pulling in after a long 10-hour shift at work. I haven't forgotten about the scary incident, but I put it in the back of my mind for the time being to concentrate on other things. Although I lost sleep over it. I park my car facing the large lawn area again and start using my phone for a few minutes. I'm peering down on my phone and glance up for a split second before I see him there. He's standing across the lawn staring angrily at me. I mean furious. I quickly look back down and pretend I have not seen him, getting that sinking feeling again. As a paranoid person, I put the key in the ignition just in case and pretended to keep scrolling on my phone while subtly locking my door. I glance up again and this time he's walking towards me, very fast. I look in my rearview mirror, hoping to see someone that he may be stomping angrily towards, and of course no one else is there. It's nearly dark now, but when he gets about 10 to 15 feet away from the front of my car, I can hear him shouting something, but I can't make out what he's saying. Now I put my phone down and I'm watching him come right at me until he reaches my window and starts banging it all with his might, and slams his body into the door. He's also fidgeting angrily with the handle, even though the doors are locked. My car doesn't have automatic locks, so I'm praying that all my doors are locked at this point. My hands are shaking so bad that I'm having trouble starting the car. When I finally do, I realize what he's saying, which was a repeated cycle of the following phrases. I'm going to get you. I told you I can come in whenever I want. You really want to take me on? I'll kill you. I peeled out of there so fast, not even knowing where to go. I drove to the next county over, found a motel, and stayed the night there. The next day, I took work off and went straight to the management's office. I told them exactly what happened, and no matter what I said, they didn't believe me. This maintenance man was apparently a gift to mankind or something. He was a monument to the company, and they appreciated his 20 years of service and dedication to them over him risking someone's life with threats. Long story short, I lost it. I called her psychotic and ended up getting evicted. I reported all this to the police, but between the lack of evidence I had and his perfect record / shining references from his employers that seemed to love him, the police said that there was nothing they could do to move forward at that point. My dad and I ended up finding a nice home about 10 minutes away from that place. I ended up inviting Claire, my older neighbor, to the new house a few months later. She told me there was a single woman in the apartment before the roommate, and my dad had moved in there that also left in a hurry after something happened with the maintenance man taking photos of her walking to and from her apartment to her car. When she confronted him about it, he told her, I can do whatever I want. I guess in Kansas City, maintenance workers are considered gifts to mankind. Needless to say, it's been 4 years and I'm back in California. This happened when I was about 18 years old. I was big into running back then and lived in a town that was a suburb but had big swaths of farmland, as in smallish tomato and strawberry fields, not huge never-ending wheat fields. I preferred running on the dirt at the edges of these fields because it was a lot easier on my legs than running long distances on concrete or asphalt, and I was usually training for half marathons. This particular day I was planning to run an easy 6 miles. I told my mom and she suggested I do a loop and then meet them at the dog park about 3 miles from our house as my halfway point. This is pre-cell phone area, but being careful I took a walkie-talkie my dad always used and my mom took the other one. Now, the walkie-talkie had a range longer than the ones my brothers and I played around with when we were younger, but it definitely did not work 3 miles away and I honestly had no idea what its exact range was. So, I take off to my run. I'm planning to go on the sidewalk for a little bit until I get to the fields. I think it was lettuce or something then, but short small plants. I'm running in the dirt with the road a few yards to my left. I have to run south and then turn right onto a slightly smaller, less traveled road to get to the dog park. As I'm running on the first dirt part, my parents drive by and, being dorks, they honk and wave and yell at me. I wave and then soon after I make my turn onto the smaller road. This one is road, me on flat dirt, small drainage ditch, forever of lettuce field, then a wall that is the backyard of some houses. I start noticing how quiet the street is and how few cars are passing me. Then I randomly start thinking to myself, if someone tried to do something, I could run to those houses. Then I hear a car, but this one doesn't pass me like all the others. I hear it slow down so that it is behind me, just out of my peripheral vision. My senses go super alert and I immediately realize what an idiot I was to pick this route because I'm stuck out here with no one to help me and nowhere to hide. The car starts speeding up enough so that it's next to me and I glance over and see a man. Middle-aged, white, dark hair. Totally normal looking, but I get a chill down my spine immediately. He sort of leans over into the passenger seat and says in a super sweet voice, "Hi, where are you going? Do you need a ride?" I am scared and realize that this is not good. Immediately, nothing has happened yet and he could be totally innocent just wanting to chat, but my intuition is in overdrive telling me I'm not safe. I hop over the ditch thinking at least that will make it harder for his car to follow me if I need to take off across the field to try and make it to those houses in the distance. Well, this pisses him off. He guns it and gets closer to the ditch and in front of where I am, and then he says in a voice I can only describe as bone-chillingly evil, "You know, you shouldn't be out here all alone. Something horrible could happen to you out here and no one would ever know where to find you." He put his car in park and is taking off his seatbelt when I remember the walkie-talkie. Piece of junk is all static because I'm too far away, so I immediately turn down the volume and say loudly, "Hey Dad, yeah, I see your car. I'm over here by this red Buick. Do you see me?" Fake wave to no one. There was no car coming from the direction my parents were, and when I had started talking, there was no one behind us either. But by the grace of the universe at that exact moment, a car turned onto the road. The guy saw it, looked at me, and sped off so fast he left skid marks. I have never run faster in my life, and I was looking behind me every few seconds and thought he'd be waiting for me at every intersection I had crossed. I was shaking and I was scared and relieved when I got to the dog park. I told my parents everything and my mom called the cops. They took a statement but said it would just help if something actually happened to someone else. The weird part was, I was having trouble getting my story out and I was so upset, and before I gave a description of the car, the cop asked, "Was it a red Buick?" He wouldn't tell us why, but that just added to my feeling that I had narrowly escaped something awful. This was back in 2013 when I was living in New York City as a 23-year-old. I was living with my best friend from college on the west side near Times Square in K-Town. I was going through some tough times back then as I was unemployed at the time. I had a lot of time, so I would go on walks by myself to clear my head time to time. One night, I was feeling exceptionally depressed, so I decided to walk to K-Town to grab a drink by myself. I walked into a Korean bar and I got some weird looks from the waiter as I asked for a table by myself. After ordering a couple of soju bottles, I was feeling pretty drunk, so I decided to walk back home. However, as I was exiting out of the bar, this Korean guy followed me. He looked very normal, just like a nice Korean guy. He told me that he saw me drinking at the bar by myself and that he would love to walk me home to make sure I got home safe. I politely declined. After all, my apartment was pretty close, but he insisted and he looked so harmless that I decided to take him up on his offer. We walked like 10 minutes I think, and it was quite pleasant. We were both a little drunk, but I remember talking about all sorts of things, nothing personal. When we finally arrived at my apartment, I thanked him and wished him farewell. Now, my apartment was a 5-story walk-up, and there was a main door where we needed a key to open to get into the building. No doorman. I didn't think much of it and inserted the key to open the door and went in. The door takes a while to close shut, and it was my mistake for not checking before I went up the stairs. While I was approaching the second floor, I heard someone grab the door from closing, and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I literally got goosebumps all over my body, and I felt like I was in danger. As I started to pick up the pace, I heard the footsteps going faster up the stairs. I lived on the 5th floor, and I started to run up, clutching my keys in my hand. The guy started to run up the stairs as well, and I can literally hear him getting closer and closer to me. This all happened in a couple of seconds, but it felt very long. I finally got to my floor, and as I tried to open the door, I looked back and literally saw the guy's head on the staircase. I rushed to open the door and I managed to close the door right on his face. My heart was beating so fast and I didn't know what to do at that point. It was already 3 AM and my roommate was asleep. Luckily, he didn't knock or anything, so I decided to just go to my room and hope that he's gone home. Around 7 AM, my roommate woke me up. She said that there is a man standing in front of our apartment door. My heart sank and I explained the whole situation to her. She and I went to the door and screamed that we were going to call the police if he doesn't go home. I looked at the people and he told me that he will only go home if I gave him my number. We then called the police and saw him being escorted out. My roommate had to go to work, so she left the apartment and called me a few minutes later. She told me that she saw the guy speaking to the police downstairs. Apparently, he tried to lie to the officers that I'm his girlfriend and that we got into a fight. My roommate went up to them and explained to the officers that I do not have a boyfriend and that she doesn't know him at all. The police let him off with a warning. About 2 hours later, I heard a buzz from the main door downstairs. Maybe it's the police? Surely it can't be him again, right? I answered the intercom and I was shook. It was him again. "Just give me your number and I'll go away," he said. I warned him that I'm going to call the police again if he doesn't leave. A couple of minutes later, I heard ferocious knocks on my door. He must have gotten in when someone was entering the building. I was so scared at that point, so I immediately called the police. Unfortunately, the guy ran away before the police got there. The worst part about this experience was that my roommate and I were so scared to leave and come back to our apartment. I would have anxiety every time I come home, worried that I might see him in front of our apartment door. For about a week, the police escorted us when we felt scared, bless them. I never saw him again, but it was one of the scariest moments of my life. So creepy stalker dude, let's not meet. I live with my girlfriend as expats in a pretty foreigner-friendly Asian country. Most of the time we get by just fine despite only knowing a little bit of the language, because most people we interact with on a day-to-day basis speak fluent English. We started out in a tiny apartment which we quickly outgrew. We found a gorgeous condo with nice amenities and decided to move in. This condo is owned and managed by a local owner, rather than by an association or company. The building is a little bit older, which means that instead of key card access to our door, it came with a traditional key lock inside and bar latch, which is nice because it's more durable than a chain. Of note, our original building also had key card access to our floor, meaning that we could only ever access our own floor. Even the emergency exit stairwells did not allow entry to floors other than our own. This new place did not include this measure, and I routinely enjoyed a walk up the 15 flights of stairs to the room as a bit of a warm-up before going swimming. The quaint feeling of all of this changed about 2 months after we moved in. We were both starting new jobs and dragged our feet on some of the final touches of moving into a place. That is the last time we ever do that. My girlfriend nudged me awake at about 3 in the morning. I wake up extra groggy and unsure of my surroundings, but I snapped to full attention when she whispered with wide eyes, "Someone is trying to open the door." Now, the condo is 100 square meters, and the main door and the bedroom are at opposite ends. The bedroom itself has a rather sturdy door that was closed, and the aircon runs at night, so this had to have been some sort of commotion for her to wake up. I sprung out of bed and made it to the door in seconds. There was some guy outside our door, studying very intently at our lock. He was about my height, though probably 15 kilos heavier, and he was not a foreigner like us. "Wrong room," I had to yell, because the door is pretty thick. There was a pause and then a thud, then a smaller tock 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 as he was knocking. From experience I know that it's hard to hear through the door, and if English was not his first language, then understanding me through the door was going to be a real challenge anyway. Looking through the people as he kept up steady knocking, I noticed he swayed back and forth slightly, so I figured he maybe had a couple drinks and had the wrong room. I turned to my girlfriend and told her so, and that I was going to open just the key lock but not the bar latch and tell him he had the wrong room. She didn't love the idea, but what was a good alternative? I took a deep breath and undid the key lock. My hand shook as I turned the handle, and one hand braced against the door while the other opened it slightly. He must have been leaning close because I saw his face right at the opening, and I could smell beer on his breath. "You've got the wrong," was what I got out before he pushed against the door as hard as he could. The bar latch held, but it was enough that my girlfriend threw herself against the door, and with our combined force we shut it again. "No," I yelled, "go away, wrong room." Then he muttered something that sent chills through me. The door muddled the noise, having just woken up played tricks on my ears, and the language barrier filled in the gaps. But I could swear I heard him laugh a little and say, "Stupid boy." I froze. My girlfriend turned the key lock as he slammed his body into the door once, twice, 3 times, I lost count. Every time I pressed against it harder, but I could still swear the 4 screws that held the bar latch in place wiggled slightly. The thuds returned, and looking through the people, I could see that he was punching the door. His stoic face looked patient and annoyed as he swung his arm back over and over each time it hit my girlfriend, and I could feel the vibration through our entire bodies. After what felt like an eternity, the pounding stopped and I looked through the people. He wasn't there any longer. I listened closely and I could hear the long ding of the elevator down the hall. He might be leaving. My girlfriend had both our phones, texting the condo owner on hers and shoving mine at me. She was calling the owner, but at 3 AM there was no answer. Frantic text of "someone is trying to break in" spammed the other end when no one was picking up. She messaged friends of ours who live in the next building, but we both knew it'd be hours before anyone responded to us. We calmed down a bit and agreed that we were going to be up for the rest of the night, but that we'd settle up with the condo owner in the morning and report it to the building management. There were security cameras in the hallways, so they'd be able to follow up. Then I heard the elevator ding again. I was shaking as I returned to the peephole and watched as the chunky man returned. He was hanging up a mobile phone, and he retrieved something from his pocket, a knife, a multi-tool, and that's when I said, "He's back," and I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife within reach and reached to brace the door. My girlfriend was almost in a full-blown panic as she grabbed the cast iron skillet. That's when I realized for the first time that there was a chance that someone was going to die. The door handle was wiggling as he started to poke at the lock with whatever was in his pocket. If he opened one lock, the only thing between him and us would be 4 tiny screws in the bar latch, and if he got in this condo, we were going to defend ourselves as best as we could. And that's where I realized we were foreigners, and dealing with manslaughter charges in a foreign court system would be an absolute nightmare. Or if we severely injured him and he was able to communicate his story, his way to the police, while we struggled with an interpreter. And of course, this is all assuming that we would be the ones to overpower and subdue him. All this is running through my head as I called the equivalent of 911 and shouted English into the phone until someone spoke English. My brain wouldn't quiet down enough for me to be polite. I finally got an operator that spoke English, and I explained someone was trying to break into our condo, that he had left and returned, and gave him the address. He sent a car and asked for an ETA, and he couldn't give me one. He wandered off again, but my spider sense was in full alert mode. It wasn't until half an hour later, when several people wearing police uniforms and building management jumpsuits knocked on the door, that I calmed down even a little. Still, I wasn't sure what to expect. One of the group spoke English while the rest stood back. I explained everything in detail and pointed at the camera in our hallway, saying I wanted whoever it was found. One of the cops pointed at the nearby knife and raised an eyebrow, and I just confidently said, yeah, I would have if I needed to. After assurances and apologies and promises of follow-up, we received what we should have collected weeks ago: direct phone numbers to our building security room where cameras are monitored, as well as the local police station and the personal mobile number of our building security director. The sun was coming up and our condo owner called my girlfriend to comprehend what was going on. She promised us that she'd sent locksmiths there that day to install another deadbolt as well as a second bar lock if it helped us feel safe. The follow-up of everything was that the guy was indeed someone who got drunk and mistook the room. It was on the wrong floor. His wife had to come collect him more than once, and he would be fined for the cost of installing the extra locks. So while it is a bit comforting to know that he's a random drunk instead of a burglar, I still explained to building management that I have no desire for an apology from him. I don't care if he feels bad. Police reports here can be messy, and locals can hold severe grudges that I did not want to deal with. I will only keep from a full police report if I literally never see or hear from him again. So just as some background, I am male and currently 25 and still living within 15 miles of my old house. This happened when I was about 8 or 9, making my sister at the time 5 or 6. We lived in a quiet neighborhood that, once I grew up, I found out was actually a lower income part of town. However, we had some wonderful neighbors, and it was thanks to these neighbors that a lot of potentially negative situations were avoided. At the time, my dad was working an 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. job, and my mother was a secretary at a hospital, which meant that during the day she was often at work. Usually my sister and I had a babysitter, but once I reached about 8 or 9, I began to be old enough to look out for us without a babysitter. Now mind you, this was the 90s, which certainly were not safe, but were much safer than they are now. Also, we had the previously mentioned neighbors who generally did a good job of keeping an eye on us in our house. This particular incident was one of the first times I was charged to babysit for my sister. She was in her high chair eating whatever my mom had left for us when I got a knock on our front door. And this was strange since we never got visitors on a regular basis, other than the boy across the street who would want us to come out and play, but he usually just yelled my name while knocking. I was young and naive and decided to open the door. There was a locked screen door beyond that. I left that closed and locked. Outside was a middle-aged man. I hardly remember his facial features or even body type. I remember his yellow shirt and dirty jeans. "Can I help you?" I asked innocently, no alarm bells going off yet. "Hey there, are your parents home?" Alright, first alarm bell. My parents teaching me not to trust strangers rushed through my head, but I still didn't quite fully grasp the potential danger here. My mom went to the store. She'll be back any minute. Weird half-lie. I could have said she was here but in the shower, or that she was laying down upstairs. I'm glad I didn't tell him that she wouldn't be back for quite a few hours, but looking back it's scary how naive I was. "Well, that's no problem. Hey, so look, my dog went missing and I think it went into your backyard. Do you mind if I can come in and we can go check it out?" Okay, so I might have been dumb, but I wasn't that dumb. There was no way I was letting this stranger into my house, especially with my sister there. She was my first thought. Sure, I didn't want to have any harm follow me, but she was my sister and it was my job to keep her safe. I should have closed the door right then and there, but once again I went with a less safe but still not totally stupid route. Well, the gate should be unlocked. If you want to go check the backyard, you can. And promptly closed the door. Now, of course I was very curious if there was a stray dog in my backyard. Dogs are great. Even with the weird guy being around, I was pretty interested to see how his search in the backyard went. So I decided to go check the back window and see if there was actually a dog, and if so, if the man would catch it. Now at this point, I am sure you have figured out that there was no dog, and when I looked out the back window, I could see almost the entire yard, including the gate. The man wasn't there. This was mere seconds after I had closed the door on him. I waited for a few minutes, but he never showed up. After about 5 minutes, there was another knock on my door. This time I was much more wary and I didn't like this guy showing up. I was pretty tired of the whole ordeal, but I still hadn't fully grasped the situation. I kept the chain lock on the door and cracked it open. "Did you find your dog?" Again, I can't remember his facial features, so I can't really recall his expression, but I remember his tone was a bit desperate as well as annoyed. "No, I looked all over the yard and I couldn't find him. I have a picture of my car if you want to take it just in case you see him." Nope, no more. I still didn't understand abduction, but I certainly was not going to go anywhere outside of the house with a stranger. I told him that he can leave a picture in the mailbox and we will keep an eye out, once again promptly closing the door. What followed is what really creeps me out to this day. Looking back, I was freaked out that I had to come that close to exposing my sister and myself to danger, but this really scared me. Suddenly there was more knocking on my door. Not the screen door separating the door itself. Like I mentioned previously, the screen door was locked, and unless that was open, it was impossible to knock on the door itself. It freaked me out and I took my sister to my bedroom and crept back out to the kitchen where I could see out onto the front yard and saw the man quickly getting back into his car while my saint of a next door neighbor Joan stood on our front lawn smoking and watching him intently. It took a long time for me to add it all up, and honestly, I had forgotten about it for a long time. When I finally remembered it all, I couldn't even believe my own memories. Either way, Mr. Yellow Shirt Man, yeah, let's not ever meet again. Also, thank you Joan wherever you are. You saved me on multiple occasions and I didn't even know it. When I was in 4th grade, my family was still living in Denver, Colorado in a small condo near my school. My brother, kindergartner at the time, and I only had to cross the street and walk between a couple of apartment buildings to get to the football field attached to our school. It was normally a pretty quick and safe trip to and from. My mother was taking night classes at NAU at the time, and her boyfriend, whom we lived with, would usually watch us in the evenings, although he wasn't off work until about 6:30 p.m. We grew up as latchkey kids, so this wasn't a big deal. One day, my brother and I were walking home together after school like we'd usually do and had just gotten to the street in front of our home when a white car pulled up in front of us. The man driving the car didn't seem like your typical weirdo, maybe in his late 20s and looking pretty clean cut. Looking back, the fact that he was driving such a fancy car, a Benz I believe, and wearing such a crisp outfit didn't really fit with our neighborhood. He asked my brother and I if our parents were home. I immediately got a serious sensation of stranger danger from this dude. I looked at our apartment across the street, then back at him, and in the most I'm not stupid tone I could find, I asked why. "It doesn't matter," he replied dismissively. "Are they home?" He seemed a little more insistent with his question and glanced around. Yep, despite fully knowing they were not home and that my mom's boyfriend wouldn't be able to be there for another 2+ hours. I figured it was better to lie and say yes. "What are they doing?" he asked, really looking us over. I then turned to my brother and ordered him, "Let's go," but he wouldn't follow me. I went to grab his hand and he quickly withdrew with a sharp no and looked back at the guy. The guy then looked at both of us and then back to my brother, and with a facial expression that made my hair stand on end, he said, "Come closer, I have something for you." My brother started walking to the door of the car and the guy was reaching with his hand out, nothing in it, like he was about to grab him. I grabbed my brother's coat immediately and started hauling him towards our apartment as fast as I could. He was screaming for me to let him go, but I was terrified so I just kept dragging him. The guy quickly put his car into gear and literally peeled out of there. My mother's friends started picking us up from school after that and a PSA was issued to the community. I still get a little creeped out when cars slow down near me while I'm outside walking. Potential child abductor, let's not meet again. It was the middle of summer and my parents had left for the weekend to go to our house in the Cape Cod. It's about a 2-hour drive away, so it's no big deal for them to leave me alone for a few days. My mom had some pulled pork and pasta for me to heat up to eat whenever I had some money if I wanted to order a pizza. Things were all good. The first night I was alone, I stayed up till 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I woke up really late the next day. I checked my phone when I woke up and saw it was a little past 1. I had made plans to play some street hockey with my friends at 3, so I threw myself out of bed and stumbled into the shower. I take really long showers, so when my parents are gone I go mental. I was in there for about 45 minutes on my phone scrolling through Reddit and Twitter and whatnot, when I heard my front door open. The bathroom is directly up the stairs from the back door, and the thing is pretty loud when it opens and closes. I immediately froze, since obviously I was supposed to be alone. I waited for about 2 minutes, ears trained and trying to hear anything else. Nothing. I figured it was just the wind or maybe my parents were home early, so I turned off the shower, wrapped my towel around myself, and slowly walked down the stairs to check it out. Even though my house is old and each step on the stairs makes a super loud creak, I still took my time and tried to be as quiet as possible. I probably took 45 seconds walking down all 12 of the stairs. So when I get to the second to last stair, right before I could see around the corner to the kitchen, I take a little breath to compose myself. In my mind, I knew I was being stupid. There obviously wasn't anything in the kitchen. There's no way I wouldn't have heard another noise, and there's no reason for them to still be in the kitchen even if they were burglars or something in the house. After sort of mentally chastising myself for being such a wuss, I sort of chuckled to myself for being so stupid and just normally walked the last 2 stairs and turned the corner to the kitchen. Standing about 2 feet away from me in the middle of my kitchen is a man staring straight at me, perfectly still, with a massive smile across his face, just staring at me. The thing I remember most vividly wasn't his face or his smile but his arms. They weren't just at his side. He held them in the strangest, most abnormal position I've ever seen. They were where one would normally hold their arms, but he had rotated them to the point where they were almost completely reversed, as well as lifting them up and a little behind himself. Honestly, I think I almost had a heart attack right there. Looking back, I can realize how creepy this situation was, but in the moment I just took a step towards him and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, sort of half slapping / pushing him towards the ground. The second I connected, I beelined up the stairs, dropping my towel in the kitchen with my heart beating out of control. I sprinted into my room and locked the door behind me. I quickly put a chair up against the doorknob like you see in TV. Almost without thinking, I immediately called 911 and nearly in tears told the operator what happened. As I sat on the floor of my room in practically the fetal position, staring at the door praying that a cop would be here soon, I noticed the light coming from the gap between my door had stopped. The guy was standing outside of my door. There's no words to describe the feeling I had. I was paralyzed with fear, watching the shadow across the bottom of the door shift in tiny ways. I stayed balled up, staring at the gap, praying the man would go away for what seemed like an hour. All the while, the 911 operator was asking, "Hello, sir? Sir, are you there? Hello?" I didn't want to make a noise, and even if I wanted to move my arms to bring the phone to my mouth, I don't think I could have. Eventually the light returned to the gap and I heard the faintest of footsteps, slowly creaking the wooden floorboards as he walked down the hall. It was silent for minutes as I just sat there curled up, unable to even speak. I heard banging on the front door and the sound of 2 officers entering my house. I finally felt safe, and I opened the door to the 2 of the men standing there as I almost cried. Nowadays, my parents don't even leave me alone home anymore, and I check every lock on the house before going to bed. Even working with sketch artists in a few lineups, the police never found whoever was in my house. I have no idea what he wanted or who he was, but regardless, let's not meet again, ever. I'm 29 now. This story happened 10 years ago. At the time I was jobless, and I found a job as a security guard in an office building. The office building was in a forested area, away from any busy streets, like secluded. The person who had the job before me had a car accident and apparently was paralyzed from the waist down. Nobody was interested in the job since you worked during the night and the office building was so big, it was just really boring. But hey, a job is a job. Once I started, a supervisor worked me in for a week, what to do, etc. This was my first night working by myself. I came to work and took the shift over from my colleague at 9 PM and he told me there will still be some people left in the building. Before I went up to the 15th floor, I closed the main entrance in such a way you could only exit when you're inside, so no outsiders could come in. After I did this, I went up to the 15th floor where these people still worked, to ask them if they needed to go anywhere else in the building, and if not, I could make my round and close off all the other floors, which I did. So I made my rounds and found nothing peculiar. I went back to my front desk. This was around 11:30 PM, and the last people who were working on the 15th floor were just leaving. And the guy told me he was the last one to leave and wished me good night. Once the last person left, I went up to the 15th floor, checked all the offices and locked it down. I went down to my front desk again. Since there were no people left, I put on the alarms, which work on motion detection and also when you open a fire exit, on every floor, except the ground floor where my desk was. Within 5 minutes I put the alarm on all floors. The alarm went off on the 10th floor and there was nobody on the building. The rule is if an alarm goes off, you first call the security company before you take action. I told them I would investigate the alarm and I would call them back once I checked it out. Otherwise, if I don't call back, they would send a police car to check it out, just as a precaution. I checked the whole 10th floor and I found nothing. Went back to call the security company, telling them it was a false alarm. I kid you not, the alarm on the 10th floor went off like 7 times in an hour, and every time I checked the floor, I couldn't find anything out of order, or even that there was someone there. Since this was my first day working alone, and the alarm went off so many times, the security company thought I was screwing things up and wanted to file a complaint to my boss, which would mean I would lose my job I just had for a week. In retrospect, the following was the dumbest thing I could ever do, because the alarm went off again. Since I didn't want to call the security company again and cry wolf, I went up to the 10th floor without informing the security company. The only thing I had on me was a mag light, since security guards in the Netherlands are not allowed to carry guns. I went up to the 10th floor, checked the floor, and as before, found nothing. The only difference now was I pretended to leave, turned off the lights, and stayed on the 10th floor, listening if someone was there. In about 5 minutes, I heard someone or something moving. I was relieved and anxious at the same time. relieved I wasn't wrong and that there was something on the floor, anxious because of what was on the floor. I turned on the lights and tried to sound as manly as possible, saying something in the line of, "I know there's someone here, show yourself." As you can imagine, no response. So stupid I didn't go down to call for help, but stupid me went looking to whatever it was I heard on the 10th floor. I walked to the office I heard the sound from, turned on the lights, and found a little girl who couldn't be older than 13 with long brown hair, in white pajamas squatting and rocking front to back on a desk, looking straight at me. The scary thing was there was no emotion in her face or in her eyes. I collected my nerves and took the girl by the hand. I took her down to the front desk, offered her a Coke, but she didn't respond whatsoever. The only thing I could do was call my supervisor and told him about what I encountered. My supervisor's response was, "Stay there, I'll be right over." The time I hung up on the phone until my supervisor came, I just had this underbelly feeling with this girl, that there was something really wrong with her. Before my supervisor turned up, he called me and told me to call an asylum which was pretty close to the office building I worked at, just to check if someone was missing. Why would there be a 13-year-old girl in an office building with no houses nearby whatsoever? So that's what I did. I called the asylum, asking them if there was someone missing from the asylum, and I got the scariest response you can get. Yes, as a matter of fact, someone is missing. I gave them a description of the girl sitting next to me, and it was in fact the girl who was missing from the asylum. They told me she was really dangerous and that I should watch my back at all costs. They immediately sent people over to take the little girl with them. A week later, my supervisor told me the story of the girl I found, since he talked with the people from the asylum. It turns out the girl killed her mom and dad and little brother whilst they were asleep when she was 11. Even in the asylum, she wounded staff members, either by stabbing them with a pencil or in another case biting a piece of an ear off. To this day, we still have no clue how she ever came in the building. We checked all the cameras and there was no footage of her ever entering the building. I grew up in a very safe, very affluent neighborhood. It was unheard of for anyone to lock their cars or houses, and when someone new moved to the neighborhood, it was mere moments before they were welcomed with open arms and open doors. Despite being surrounded by what could be described as one large neighborhood family, my mom was very particular about house rules being followed, one of which was never going out alone. Walking to a friend's house, 3 of us had to go, so 2 could walk home together after dropping you off. It was rare, but occasionally just 2 of us would be able to sneak out from under her watchful eye and run to the corner store a few blocks down for some candy or soda. One sweltering day during the summer, I turned 9. I found myself home alone and restless. I decided to take my sister's cool new 10-speed for a spin around the block a few times. Now, even though I was tall for my age, the bike was still a few inches too big for me. I decided that didn't matter, jumped on and started pedaling. My first lap around the neighborhood went off without a hitch. Birds were chirping, sun was shining, and the wind blowing through my curled hair felt wonderful. Second lap around the block, I passed an older, unfamiliar car parked on the side of the road, and the sun reflecting off the huge scrape down the side temporarily shocked my vision into bright blue stripes which I furiously tried to blink away. The third lap, I saw the car pull off the side of the road heading towards me, and a tiny pit of unease began to grow in my stomach as the driver slowed when he passed me. I chalked it up to being scared of being caught out being alone, and continued on my way. I picked up speed as I rounded the corner towards my house, and I decided to go for one more time around the block, but to make it quick so I'd beat my mom home and avoid the trouble I knew I'd be in if she caught me out alone. I hit the bottom of the hill next to our house with some speed and started to climb to the top, slowing more and more the closer I got. By the time I reached the top of the hill, I had to stop and catch my breath, teetering the too tall back at my hip. As I struggled to catch my breath, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My arms locked on the handlebars, and every inch of my body froze. I had been caught, I just knew it. I heard a car creeping up behind me, and it just had to be my mom, but it wasn't. When relief should have washed over me, the unknown dread only deepened, further stiffening my frozen still limbs. I turned to see the same old car, with the same blinding scratch down the side, slowing down right next to me. The man stopped the car right next to my bike on the wrong side of the street, and through his opening driver door started to ask me if I had seen a stray dog running around, because his had come off the leash and run off. I froze. This cliche question is the one they warned us about in school, the one every kidnapper supposedly uses. I decided if I answered him firmly and rode my bike away that he would know his plan wouldn't work on me, plus he might just really be looking for his dog. This was my plan. My terrified body betrayed that plan, and a trembling no is all I could manage. As I fumbled my feet to the pedals of this too big bike, his car door flew open and out he lunged. No, I said again as I wobbled my way past his open car door, his hand brushing the back of my shirt and knocking my back tires. I pedaled as fast as I could the 50 feet to the next driveway I saw. I pedaled, legs burning, up the drive, running my front tire so hard to my neighbor's front tire that it bent the wheel. My body catapulted over the handlebars, and I burst through the neighbor's front door. Eddie, help. My neighbor was not home. I ran into the kitchen, still calling in hopes I was wrong. "What are you doing?" a man's voice behind me, and I froze. I slowly turned around, not knowing what else to do, and there stood my neighbor's son, home from college. I dissolved into tears, gulping out what happened. He tossed the bent bike into the back of his truck and drove me around the corner to the safety of my home. My mom was home and had the look of death in her eyes until she saw my tear-streaked face. The police were called. The neighbors were called. The car had been spotted frankly circling the block the few minutes following our encounter, but he was gone by the time police arrived. To this day, 20 years later, I still have a hard time riding my bike alone. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This all happened when I was 19. I'm not the best looking dude, so I've never had much luck with women, and I ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck there either until the 3rd month of using it when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough that I just dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which was odd because bots almost never message more than once. I clicked on her chat and replied, then looked at her profile. What I saw was pretty generic, but it definitely wasn't a bot's profile. We had been talking for like a month when she proposed the idea that I come see her. I was pretty reluctant as she lived nearly 8 hours from me by car, but I had to admit I really did like her quite a bit, and I had been thinking about asking her if I could come see her for a while now. After a bit more badgering from her, I finally said that I would take the drive to go see her. At this point, I had no reason to doubt she said who she said she was. We had video chatted every other week and called most days, and I just assumed I got really lucky. Things did get a little weird on the way there though. She kept messaging me, asking me where I was, and making sure I was still coming. At some points, when I took more than 30 minutes to respond, she would send me a slew of annoyed texts. Admittedly, I had chalked this all up to her being nervous about me coming to see her. I was pretty nervous too, so I couldn't blame her. I had a hard time finding the house at first. The directions she gave me were pretty confusing, and it was back through a series of gravel and dirt roads and a large thicket of trees. It was still about midday when I came onto an old-looking house. A window on the 2nd floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned, just worse for wear. Katie's red buggy that she liked to talk about was parked in front of the garage. I took out my phone and texted her that I was here. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of my car to go knock on the door, I noticed someone was looking at me from one of the 2nd floor windows. I found it a little creepy, but figured it was just her father or something. She had told me that he comes to stay with her every now and again, so I ignored it and knocked on her door. She answered with a smile and even gave me a kiss, which surprised me, and I followed her inside. We sat down on her couch and started talking about our plans when I asked her about her dad. "You didn't tell me your dad was here," I said. "Was that going to be a surprise or?" Katie looked confused and told me that her dad wasn't here. I still thought she was keeping up the act, and I told her that she didn't have to keep pretending, and that I had seen him looking at me through the upstairs window. Katie went pale and said that we had to get out of there now. We both ran out to our cars, and when I questioned Katie, she informed me that her dad wasn't there and that she had been home alone until I showed up. I called the police, and while I was on the phone giving the address, Katie gasped and pointed to the window where I had seen the guy last. He was looking at us from out the window again. I got a better look of him and he seemed older and frail, almost like he hadn't eaten anything in a while. He left the window after he saw that we saw him. The police took half an hour to show up, and the whole time Katie was crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot for not keeping her doors locked. When the police finally did show up, one started asking me and Katie questions, and the other two searched the house. They came back out a little later and told me and Katie that, while they didn't find anyone, they did find that the back door was hanging open. Whoever it was had ran out into the woods, but the cops were sure the house was empty. After the cops left, Katie asked me to stay the night because she was too scared to be in her house alone right now. I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch as Katie's bed was the room next to the one the man had been in. Katie had also brought out the shotgun that her father had given her but she never used. I told her it was fine, the man's gone, but she insisted, saying she'd feel safer if we had it out. I'm glad she did. Later that night, I was still wide awake, watching TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep. From the kitchen, I heard the sound of a doorknob being turned. At this point, I wasn't even scared, I was just pissed. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door, and there he was. The guy that had been in the house before was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I'm glad we had locked the door. The man unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke up Katie and told her what happened and called the police yet again. When they arrived, they did a sweep of the woods and found no one yet again. They told Katie and me that it'd probably be a good idea to stay at somewhere else for the night. Me and Katie said our goodbyes. She was going to stay at our friend's house and I was going home. I left a little after Katie did, and I was on the phone with my brother telling him about what happened. My headlights were on. As I was talking, something caught my eye. That man was standing at the corner of the house just watching me. I gunned it out of there and didn't even bother calling the police again, but I did text Katie and she said she was going to call them again. I don't think Katie ever even went back into the house alone. I had to fly out to a small town I'd never been to in order to look for a place to live. I'm moving there in the fall to start grad school. My boyfriend flew with me. Before the trip, I researched all sorts of apartments on Craigslist and set up a bunch of appointments. Our first appointment was in the afternoon in this sort of remote residential area. The landlord sounded fine over email and asked me to call him an hour before the appointment to confirm that I was coming. I called, he didn't answer, so my boyfriend and I started walking to the house and just hoped that he would show up. Maybe 10 minutes before the appointment, he called me. "Are you coming?" he asked. He sounded like an older man and had this very strange, slow way of talking, but I just thought that he was just older. "Yes, we're in front of the house now." He got extremely upset. "We? Oh yes, my boyfriend's with me. You never told me you had a boyfriend. You never said that." It had never crossed my mind to tell him this information, since my boyfriend would not be coming to live with me. He was just helping me look for apartments on the trip. I told the man so, and after a very long pause he said, "I'm sorry, it's just sometimes people don't tell me when they're married, and it surprises me. I'll see you soon." Then he hung up. I told my boyfriend about what the man had said and he was immediately weirded out. He wanted to leave, but there were slim pickings in terms of real estate at this point, so I stupidly said that we had to stay, in case this place was the place. As we're discussing it, we see a man leave the house we're going to view. This man was young and extremely sketchy looking, greasy hair, furtive eyes. He took one look at us and ran out of the house to his car and pulled away from the curb with a screech. Okay, so now we're really weirded out, but this isn't enough for us to bail just yet, and as we look at each other wondering what to do, the landlord arrives. He's in his 50s, very tall and very strong looking. His eyes are completely blank and empty of warmth or emotion. He slowly walks up to us and says, "I'd shake your hands, but mine are dirty." "What from?" my boyfriend asked. "Work," is the flat reply. He asks us a lot of questions about me, completely ignoring my boyfriend. The entire time he stares into my eyes without blinking. What am I going to school for? What other places am I considering for living? Is my boyfriend moving to this town too? I try to give answers that are as vague as possible. Meanwhile, my boyfriend asks the landlord questions of the same kind, which he refuses to answer. Then he says, "Apropos of nothing, let me show you the basement." At this point, I should have noped out of there, but I didn't. I kept thinking this was an eccentric old man from a small town. We're city folk, and that we were just feeling paranoid. My boyfriend, on the other hand, wanted out of there, but he followed us as the man led us back to the house, away from the street to this sort of detached shed. He opened the door and we saw that there were stairs leading down into the utter darkness. He flipped the switch at the top of the stairs and the light didn't come on. Normally the response for this is, "Oh, the lights are out," or something like that, but he just said, and slowly walked down into the darkness. Then he stood there without moving in the dark and said, "Aren't you coming down?" "There's nothing to see if the light's out," says my boyfriend. The landlord just stands there for a long time, then slowly walks up the stairs and closes the basement door without saying anything. He took us into the house. Weird and increasingly creepy things ensued. The front door, the only exit to the house, locked automatically, and when my boyfriend tried to fiddle with it, the man got really upset and told him to leave it alone. He managed to get it open secretly though. The man kept trying to box us into small rooms and, according to my boyfriend, kept reaching his hands into his pockets, only to take them away when he caught us looking. On Craigslist and in person, the man claimed that there was a grad student already living in the house, but the evidence of that seemed arranged. There were neat piles of generic textbooks on the table, but not other things a 20-something might read. There was a bowl of fruit on the table, but no other food in the fridge or pantry, or utensils. There were maybe 3 t-shirts in the closet. This supposed grad student wasn't out of town, but the landlord couldn't say what school he went to or how long he'd been renting the house. Finally, the man had showed us every single room in the house but one. This one he refused to open, claiming it was just the attic and we didn't need to see anything up there. He gave us several reasons when we inquired. It was unfinished, there was furniture up there, it would smell bad. This last one I believed, because standing near the door, it smelled terrible. Finally, we made our excuses and bolted out of there. The man walked us out, pretended to go into his car to leave, and when he thought we had turned the corner, slowly sauntered back into the house. My boyfriend, fixated on the idea that there was something wrong with this guy, googled the man that night. We found out 3 things: that he was a pillar of the community, known by a lot of the townspeople, and that there was no evidence of him owning or managing a real estate company, as he claimed on Craigslist, and he had listed his home address as the very house we had been touring, the house where the grad student lived. Yeah, we won't be renting this place. This happened sometime in 2011. I had been married for a little over a year and had given birth to a son a couple months prior. I was 23 and had just started working in a hospital while I took classes to finish my degree and hopefully apply for the police academy. I had met one of the security guards named Joe a few times as I frequently assisted in the ER with various tasks. As I got to know him, he had a son a little younger than mine and was a veteran also applying to police academies, and we formed a friendship. We exchanged numbers as he offered to help me train and give me pointers for the physical portion of the police test since I was out of shape after having a baby. One day while talking to him, I mentioned how where I would study when on break was so loud and wish I could find a quiet place to sit. He offered to give me a tour and show me all the hidden places employees would use. It was a Sunday, so the hospital was quiet and I met up with him. We walked around and he showed me gray areas and offered to show me where the helipad was. We went through areas that were blocked to most staff. As we climbed the stairs and got closer to the roof, I started to get anxious and felt my stomach drop. I couldn't explain it and felt fear as we got closer. I'll admit, I'm afraid of heights and thought maybe that was it, but when we got on the roof, the fear got stronger, but it was directed towards Joe. Something was off, and I had this feeling that at any moment he might try something and push me over the edge of the building. I just had to get out of there. Fortunately, at that moment, the phone I carried rang and my coworker wanted to know where I was and if I'd be back soon to help her with something. I told him I had to get back and followed him back out, making sure he was never behind me. After that day, I avoided Joe at work and would only keep text messages short. I felt bad at first, thinking I was overreacting because he had never done anything to me to make me feel that way. As time went on though, the texts became more frequent and he would try to ask me what I was wearing. I told him it was inappropriate as we were both married. I started seeing him more frequently and felt he was everywhere, just lingering like he was waiting for me. Finally, one of my coworkers, Stan, asked me about it and I confided in him what was going on. I told him how I was scared to report him because he was part of security. I also mentioned how I would see him sometimes when I would leave at night around midnight and was scared that one night he'd be waiting by my car even though he didn't know what kind I drive. After that, Stan walked to my car every night at work since we had the same shifts together. After he noticed I was never alone, he stopped bothering me. A few months later, I found out that he was fired for harassing another girl, who had the courage I didn't have to report him. I feel bad that I didn't speak up at the time and someone else had to experience it. So Joe, I hope we never meet again and I hope you never got into police academy. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest where you left your doors unlocked and came home when the streetlights turned on at dusk. After moving away for college, I decided to move back to my quiet, sleepy hometown in one of the 2 apartment buildings. I'm living there for roughly 3 months when one night I go to sleep early on a Friday night. Now, I'm a reasonably hard sleeper, so when I wake in the middle of the night to noises, I'm immediately alarmed. I'm going to describe my apartment layout for a better understanding. As you walk in the front door, the kitchen is to the left and the living room is to the right. There's a hallway straight ahead with one bedroom at the end. A bathroom is to the left in the hall and my bedroom to the right. I get up from my bed, walk around the end of my bed, and peek my head out of the bedroom door. I look to the left to see my front door open to the outside hallway. There's a loud voice coming from my enlightened kitchen. From my vantage point, I'm unable to see into my kitchen. I froze. I come to my senses after realizing that I've stopped unconsciously breathing. I take a shallow breath to steady my mind and gather my bravery. There's no thought process about what to do at this point. I let my body and my instincts take over. I turn around and head back to the far side of my bed. I grab my phone from the nightstand and quietly remove it from the charger. Luckily, my bed frame is high enough for me to squeeze under without much difficulty. I immediately realize that there is no escape from my hiding spot if things turn south. I'll have to rely on luck to get me through this. I dial 911 and a woman answers and asks about my emergency. I briefly explain in a whisper that an unknown man is in my apartment and that I am currently safe. I lay there, listening to the chaos of my home, reassured by the presence of my cat, Marcy, laying under the bed with me. It seems to me that he's in a phone call based on the one-sided rambling. I tell the operator this fact and explain my fear that he's going to bring other people into my home. He was making enough sound to allow me to give a play-by-play on the call. He starts screaming about killing someone. I'm unsure at this point whether he's talking to the person on the phone or if he knows I'm there. The voice is unfamiliar, but this does little to ease my terror. He then starts ringing the doorbell in the outside hallway and yelling for me to come out. My blood runs cold as I realize that he might come try to find me. Marcy is alarmed by the doorbell that hasn't ceased ringing and she creeps out from under the bed. I panic. What if he hurts her? I start whispering as loudly as possible to get her attention without letting him know my location. She senses my unease and crawls back under the bed with me. At this point, it's felt like an eternity, and I ask the operator how long until the police arrive. She is unsure but assures me that they are on their way. My town is roughly a 30-minute drive to the nearest city police, but I assumed it was a highway patrol that would be coming soon. Little did I know that safety was in a rush to get to me. I hear him walking around my apartment and enters my extra bedroom, which is a storage room with a bed. He hasn't stopped yelling. I'm still unaware whether he's on the phone or not. I hear him mention that it must be a kid's room. I shush the operator because he's ceased his screaming for the moment. I hear more noises like he's going through boxes and throwing things. Then my fear is realized, as I hear him quietly enter my room. I see his feet walk closest to my vantage point. He starts going through my clothes and emptying my hamper onto the floor. He turns around and walks to my bed and sits down. I stopped breathing. I think he lays down at this point since the pressure of the bed lessens on top of me. He's deadly silent and I'm still holding my breath. They're shuffling and moving around and he gets up and walks out of my room. I take a shallow breath and steady my conviction. He starts making noise again like he's throwing and punching things. I inform the operator that he was just in my room and the police need to hurry. I don't know how long I can keep Marcy under the bed and concerned about what could happen if he finds me. He walks back into the kid's room quietly. I shush the operator again because she is continually asking for a play-by-play. I hear him breathing from the other room. After the quietest few minutes of my life, he yells, "Who's there?" I freeze again listening for movement, nothing. I'm starting to get lightheaded from my shallow breathing. The silence is deafening and I fear he's trying to detect me. After a lifetime, I hear footsteps entering my apartment. I hear a man's voice say, "Hey bud, you're in the wrong house." I've never felt more relief in my life before this night or since. I hear my door close and I crawl from under the bed and break down. The adrenaline and anxiety take over as soon as the feeling of safety washes over me. A female officer comes around to my side of the bed and puts her hands on my shoulders. I'm trying to keep it together and failing miserably. She let me put my clothes on and I could hear 3 male voices coming from my apartment. The woman left and came back with a handful of clothes asking if any weren't mine. They all were, and I answered in kind. She shut the door behind her as she left again. I turned and looked out my window and see no lights from the cop car on the street. I look at my phone and realize the call to 911 took 19 minutes. I can't explain the feelings I had at this time since many hit me all at once. The door opened and the officer motioned to have me exit. Taking a first look at my home was almost as anxious as the event itself. My apartment was a complete mess. Clothes were everywhere mixed with garbage and other belongings from my shelves and counters. This man had removed items that he intended on taking and placed them in the outside hallway. They tell me that they found him on the floor in the second room completely naked, holding a bottle of lotion. In his vicinity, there was a winter hat with an unknown substance inside. They tell me to look and see if any of the clothes in the apartment do not belong to me. I tell them no. This man entered my home completely naked and destroyed my home. I noticed that the lid of my garage can was filled with cat poop. It seems that it had been separated from the rest of the bag. The rest of the garbage was littered across the outside hallway. They asked me if I would like to stay here or go elsewhere. They told me my parents lived down the street and I had an officer drive me there. I explained to my parents what had just happened, and in the next few days, I have to explain the situation to what felt like half the town. The ridiculousness of the story catches people's attention and becomes a slight joke. Now I should feel better knowing that he is in custody, but the events after the break-in do little to comfort me. An officer shows up with a subpoena to appear in court to testify, but I receive a call for a postponement. I just want this to be behind me. After a month, I call the phone number on the paper I received and ask when they are rescheduling for since I hadn't heard anything. The woman informs me that they mailed another and I had not shown up. I asked where was it since I have not received a summons. She tells me that they sent it to my address, but the wrong town. It has been 2 years since this happened and I've since moved 3 times. I don't know if I'll ever be content and happy anywhere, but I'm hoping that is not the case. He was released 6 months after his conviction for some reason or another on parole. He immediately disappeared and fled from his parole officer. So naked man, I hope to never meet you again. So about 6 years ago, I was 21 and I was home from college for the summer and living with my parents. This is deep Texas suburbs, so the houses are all cookie-cutter houses built around the same time by the same developer. Every few blocks there's a pool or a park of some sort. Well, every year the community people, I honestly don't know how this gets organized or by whom, have a Rock the Park event at one of the pools/parks within walking distance of my house. Some old guys bring their garage band and cover songs by Aerosmith and the Eagles, etc. The pool stays open late, there's a playground, and you can hear the music from every corner of the park. It wasn't too loud though, unless you were nice and close. Well, my parents went on a dinner date that night, so I decided, with my 21-year-old brain, to pour some vodka into my Coca-Cola bottle and walk up to the park for some tunes and have a good time. It's only about a block away from me, so I get there pretty quick and down a good amount of vodka along the way. I'm feeling pretty good by the time I get there, so I head right up to the closest bench to the stage. They were just standing within some cones and speakers on the grass. There's a person sitting on the far edge of the bench, but I don't really pay attention to him first. There's a good 4 feet of empty bench between us. It didn't take long, however, for him to strike up a conversation. He had a bony face and looked to be about at least 30. He said hello, how are you, etc. I was polite back, but pulled out my phone so he might get the message that I didn't really want to talk. He asked if I'm having a good time, and like a fool, I tell him that of course I am. I'm a couple shots worth of vodka in. I shook my Coke bottle and the small amount left and it fizzed. That was when he started to ease his way in. I stayed on the far edge of the bench, but as he kept talking to me, he kept moving closer. He asked if I lived around here and I said yeah, don't worry, I walked. I honestly thought he was asking because I was not sober enough to drive. He told me he lived in some vague direction and then asked if he could have my number. I started getting uncomfortable because for the first time in my life, I was alone somewhere and in a compromised state. I told him I didn't know him that well and he said something like, okay, well, get to know me. I told him I needed to walk around because the music was too loud and I had to make a phone call. I ventured to the other side of this large playground equipment with lots of climbable walls and tubes. I make sure he can't see me, but I know he watched me where I went. I texted a bunch of my friends from college telling them what was going on and asking for advice. They told me to leave, but I knew he could see me and I didn't want him to follow. I started hitting up my friends from high school, hoping some might be home for the summer already, and luckily one of my friends was. I told her what was happening and asked if she could save me. She said she could, but that she couldn't make it for another 20 to 30 minutes, which was still well before the event ended. I went over to a different part of the playground where the swings were and took a seat where I could see the stage, hoping maybe he'd forget about me and leave me alone. Sure enough, the moment I sit, he's approaching the swings. He takes the one next to me and starts trying to be like, what did you want to know about me? What do you need to know? I was like, actually, I'm getting really tired. I am probably going to go home soon. I just want to enjoy the music a bit longer without talking. That was when he became adamant about walking me home. It was a suggestion at first, but the more I told him no and that I'd be fine, the more aggressive he got about it. My parents wouldn't be home for another few hours, so if I did go home and followed, he'd know where I live and have me alone. He asked which direction I lived in and I pointed in the opposite direction of my parents' house. He got up and took a few steps in that direction, then turned back to me like he expected me to follow. I told him that I wasn't ready to go home, but it became very clear that if I was walking home that night, he was coming whether I wanted him to or not. He stayed near me for the next 10 minutes or so until my friend arrived. I saw her car pull up and immediately got to my feet like, hey, that's my friend, and I sped off towards her car. She parked and got out and started heading back towards the park. I was like, no, hey, we gotta go now, but it was too late. He followed me and touched my shoulder. He said, hey wait, you promised to give me your number. I hadn't, but I felt rather trapped and figured that if I gave him a fake number, he'd be satisfied enough to let me leave. Sure enough, immediately after I spouted off, he calls it and starts looking at my phone, expecting it to ring. That's when my friend goes, hey, didn't your phone die? And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot, I'll get you later man, text me. And I waved to him and we both sped walked back to her car. He didn't follow, but he watched us drive away. I told her to go to the opposite direction of my house and to take the long way around. So weird guy from the party that wanted to walk me home, let's not meet again. I am a 21-year-old senior in college, living with 3 other girls in an old one-story house. We are located about a 15-minute walk from main campus and the majority of our neighbors are college students. That being said, this town is notorious for being a little, well, sketchy. Millie is home to one of the first insane asylums built in America. After the majority of it being closed down / abandoned for years, the final building was shut down about a month ago and the remaining patients were released. Now, I doubt this is directly correlated with my creepy experience, but I am not the only one who has interesting encounters with strangers since the release in this town. 2 nights ago, after getting off work around 11:30, I came home to my roommates getting ready to go for a night out. I realize now how stupid it was, but we often had an open door policy, free for anyone to come over and visit as they please. We would lock the door at night, but the one time we forgot to really came to bite us. Around midnight, I was hopping in the shower as my roommates were heading out the door. We said our goodbyes and I told them I would be meeting up with them later. I had just stepped out of the shower when I heard what sounded like the front door slamming shut. I automatically assumed one of the girls had forgotten something, so I called out their names, no response. I then hear footsteps in the hallway. I call out again, no response. Fear and dread came over me, and I immediately grabbed my clothes and ran into my bedroom. I threw my clothes on, leaned my ear to the door, and waited in silence to hear if someone was in the house. I hear nothing. I decided that it must have been one of the roommates grabbing something and leaving again, so I head into the living room to get my phone. 6 missed calls and it's still ringing. My roommate, Carrie, was on the other end. I answered and immediately could hear the panic in her voice. Lay, are you in the house? Me? Yes. Why? Carrie? You need to get out. Sam drove by and he said he saw a man walking through the front door. He called the police, but you need to leave. Nothing was going through my head besides pure adrenaline and fear. I wasn't sure of the man's intentions, but I sure wasn't going to wait and find out. While remaining on the phone with my roommate, I bolted out the front door and hid behind my car. I watched the house from afar, waiting anxiously to see any movement. As my friends approached in a truck, I sprinted out from behind my car and jumped in the back of their truck bed. Just as I did that, a dark figure scurried off into the woods running in the opposite direction. I can only assume he had been inching closer to as I was waiting for them to arrive. I screamed and we floored it out of there. I refused to go back into the house until the police arrived and it had been triple checked. There were no signs of anything being touched or stolen, which makes me wonder what the man's intentions were. You can guarantee that I've locked my door every night since, and to the stranger who walked into my house while I was in the shower, let's not meet again. Back when I was 18 years old, I started working at a gas station. This was my first job. Near the end of my first shift, I was cleaning the hot dog rollers and a man walked in. He was rough looking, not in a bad way, but like he had been working outside all day. As soon as I set eyes on him, I got the gut feeling that I needed to stay away from him. Since I wasn't the one at the register, there was no reason for him to talk to me. However, the moment he saw me, he walked over and asked if I was new. I said yes, and he told me I was doing a good job and went on his way to check out. I noticed that he had a Jamaican accent, which was weird to hear since I lived in Michigan. Honestly, at that point, I thought that my gut was wrong about him. I was right the first time. During my next shift, he once again came in, and again I was cleaning. He came over to me and I still got the bad feeling in my gut. He asked me how my day was and I told him that it was okay. He then looked at my hand. I was wearing my high school class ring and I put it on my left hand ring finger because I didn't want to scruff it up while cleaning with my right hand. He asked if I was married. I said no and I told him it was my class ring. He then asked if I was dating and I lied and said yes. He started asking me questions about my boyfriend, like how old he was, did I want to marry him, and if we were in a physical relationship. I told him I wasn't comfortable with answering that and he got mad but dropped the conversation. He would continue to ask me questions about my love life every time he would come in. After about a month and a half of this, I noticed that he would come in every day that I was working. This was weird because the days and hours that I worked changed from week to week. I asked my coworkers if he came in when I wasn't here and all of them said no. I also asked if any of them had told him what shifts I had been working, but again they said no. This honestly freaked me out and I'd start to feel nervous when I would see his car pull in. One day he tried to give me his phone number and I politely told him that I wasn't interested in it. He got mad and was telling me that I needed to take it. My coworker at this point told him that he needed to leave. The next day he came in and asked me on a date, and when I declined, he told me that I was going to regret it. He asked me several more times and each time I said no. After a while of him asking, I told him that it was never going to happen and that I had absolutely no interest in him and never would. This only made things worse. He told me that I didn't have a choice and that he would be here when I got off work and that I was going to go with him. When he left, I called my father and told him what happened and asked if mom and he could come to pick me up at the end of my shift. He said yes. I didn't get off until midnight, and about 10 minutes before my dad walked in and told me to act like I was going to go to my car as normal, but he was going to be in there. A few minutes after, the guy pulled in and got out of his car and was just standing there. As my shift was over, I hurriedly walked over to my car. He started approaching me and I jumped into the passenger seat and slammed the door shut. When he got to my door, my dad rolled down the window and pointed his gun at him. The man ran off and I thought that it was the end of it since he didn't come back into my work the next few days. However, it wasn't. About a week later, I was at the store with my mom when I got the feeling that someone was following us, and sure enough it was him. We got out of there as fast as we could, and from then on out, my mom and I were not allowed to leave without my dad. Everywhere I would go, he would show up. Even when I went to my friend's house, who lived about a half hour from me. We caught him driving by the house several times. My mother also caught him following her several times, which freaked her out. We contacted the police and told them what was going on, but they said there wasn't enough evidence and that there was nothing they were able to do. To this day, I am still mad at the police for not doing anything. He started coming back into my workplace, and I asked my boss to ban him from the store, but she said no. Later, I would find out that they were friends, and that is how he always knew when I was working. I also believe that she was the one to give him my phone number, because it was around this time that I started receiving strange messages about how I looked, about my parents, and other creepy things. I got to the point where I was so paranoid that I wouldn't leave my house without my father. I had to have him drop me off and pick me up from work, and when I was at work, anytime I had seen a car that even somewhat looked like his, I would run and hide in the back room. Even my poor mother was paranoid and wouldn't go outside without someone with her. Finally, my father had enough and told me to quit my job and that he would help me pay the few bills that I had. Even after quitting my job, I was freaked out and decided to go stay with my aunt and uncle, who was a police officer, who live about 6 hours away from me. When I got there, it was the first time in nearly 6 months that I was able to relax. It didn't last for long. One night, my uncle and I went to pick up a pizza. Less than a minute after he walked in, the glass on my door was broken and hands were grabbing me. It was the Jamaican man and another guy. They got the door open and were pulling me out. I fought them as hard as I could. I got a few good hits on them, but it didn't do much good. Thankfully, my uncle came out and both of them ran after my uncle when he announced who he was, and my uncle chased down the Jamaican man after I shouted which man he was. That day he was arrested. Later on, I found out that he was illegally here and was deported. It took me about 2 years before I would go anywhere by myself. Honestly, it wasn't until I got my CPO that I was comfortable going places without someone with me. So Jamaican man, let's not meet again. I was in college and I lived in a house with 5 roommates. I lived on the 2nd floor, and the way it was set up is important. There were 4 bedrooms on the 2nd floor and 2 bathrooms. 2 of the bedrooms each shared a bathroom, which was accessible only by the bedrooms, not the hall. So I could walk through the bathroom to my roommate's room and vice versa. My door had both a handle lock and a deadbolt, which I used every single night because it was a habit I'd had since freshman year. Because in dorms, drunk roommates or floor mates tend to wander in and wreak havoc if you don't. The door to the bathroom, however, didn't have a lock, so I could never secure that. One of my roommates had her boyfriend visiting, and he'd brought a friend with him. I hadn't spoken to the friend or gotten to know him at all, and I didn't really have any opportunities to since I didn't hang out in any of the common areas of the house, and frequently didn't even sleep there because I was casually seeing someone at the time. My first interaction with him was about 2 days into his visit. I was coming home around 6 AM from the house of the guy I was seeing, and I walked into the living room. When I came in, the visitor was alone and shirtless in my kitchen, which is open to the living room. He didn't even say hello, he just angrily asked me, "Where were you?" which I was taken aback by, because he sounded like a jealous boyfriend, but I told him I had been at my boyfriend's house and he said, "You didn't tell me you had a boyfriend." Well, of course I hadn't told him, I've never spoken to him. I made a weird face at him and went upstairs and didn't see him again for the rest of the day. I slept in my own room that same night, deadbolt secure. I woke up at around 7 in the next morning to him entering my room from the bathroom. Before I could say anything, he saw that he woke me up and said, "Sorry, I was looking for the bathroom." I replied, "Well, you're standing in it, so," and he retreated and closed the door. I didn't think much of it at the time because I was groggy and I just fell back to sleep. Now, despite all that, up to this point he didn't really creep me out, he just seemed weird. But later that day is when it got worse. I came home from my classes and went up to my room. He followed me and let himself into my room without knocking. The door had been closed, and I made it clear that that wasn't okay, but he was being friendly, so we chatted normally for a couple of minutes because I didn't want to be rude. Then he decided to say, "I think you're the one. The first moment I saw you, I knew you were the one and you're gonna marry me." Obviously, I was taken aback by this as this was only our 3rd interaction and we'd spoken for maybe 2 minutes total. I told him that I had no interest in marrying him, that I wasn't even attracted to him, and told him to leave me alone now. I decided to leave and called the guy I was seeing and told him what was going on, and he told me I could stay over at his house until this weirdo left. A couple of days go by and the weirdo was supposed to have left for good, so I went back to my house. I slept in my room that night with the door locked as usual. I woke up to hear someone trying to come in through my main door, but thought it was just one of my many roommates. Then, I hear the bathroom door open and someone walking into my room. I rolled over and he was standing maybe a foot away from my bed and said, "Hey beautiful, where have you been?" I said, "Weren't you supposed to leave? Why are you in my room?" He said, "I wanted to wait for you to come home. I couldn't leave without saying goodbye." And then he tried to climb into my bed with me and kept touching me while saying, "Scoot over, I want to say goodbye properly." To which I started yelling, "Get out of my room. I didn't invite you in. Leave now." I smacked his hands away from me and he got upset but left without much of a fight. I immediately left my house and went to my boyfriend's. The guy did finally leave later that morning. The next day, despite me yelling profanities at him and telling him how creepy he was when I last seen him in my bedroom, the guy still decided to find me on Facebook and try to add me. Nope, blocked immediately. So, creepy guy, let's not meet again. This is back in November of 2018 and takes place in North Carolina. I was 14 at the time. My family and I had just moved across states. We had just gotten to the city where we planned on living after a long road trip. We were all hungry, so decided to go grab dinner before we went to pick up the keys to our new house. We went to this local pizza shop. Since we had our dogs with us, we hadn't moved into our house yet. We decided to eat in the car. I'm a pretty fast eater compared to the rest of my family, so I finished way before them. After I was done, I decided to bring my puppy out to do her business. We were standing just a little ways up from the car, playing in the leaves on the ground. I grew up in Florida, so I wasn't used to seeing piles of autumn leaves, so was just living my best life, not paying attention to my surroundings, when a man taps on my shoulder. My dog notices him and immediately tries to jump on him, as she does with anyone, so I pull her back while I'm backing away from him. He looks to me in his mid-40s to 50s. He smiles creepily at me like it was forced. He says in his scruffy southern voice, "You have my dog, my border collie." Immediately a red flag goes off in my mind, as my dog looks very obviously like a boxer, nothing like a border collie. I just say nervously, "I think you're mistaken, sir, this is my dog." not even telling him how my dog does not look anything like he was describing. I look over to my parents' car that was just a couple feet ahead of me, unsure of what to do. They hadn't even noticed the man approach me. They were on their phones. The man now asked me, well, you would be able to come help me look for my dog, right? I can feel my stomach drop in that moment. I still don't want to make a scene, as I'm probably overreacting. He then says something along the lines of, I have some money in my truck for you if I went with him. My hands are sweating at this point. He points over to a very sketchy, run-down looking truck. I tell him I'm busy and I have to go, but best of luck to finding his dog. Still trying to keep him on my good side. Looking back on it now, I don't know why I didn't tell him my parents were right there. If I would have, I think he would have backed off. He then decides to grab my dog's leash and says he has dog treats at his truck and starts to walk away with my dog. I pull the leash away from him and say sternly, I have to go now. As I start walking away, he then grabs my wrist and rips the leash out of my hands, throwing it to the ground. He starts pulling me with him, mumbling something like, just come see what I have for you. My dog, the sweet girl she is, follows after us and starts barking, while he starts to drag me with him. I am pretty small, 5'4", and have no upper body strength, so I just start screaming to let go of me. My parents are alarmed, hearing me scream and our dog chasing after me barking, see this man pulling their daughter against their will. They immediately start sprinting after me. I start screaming, Mom, Dad. I think he got alarmed when he heard me yell out Mom, as she starts running towards us. The sudden realization that my parents were right there in their car the whole time. He makes a run for it and we didn't run after him. My parents were just glad they had me. This is definitely not a good way to start off our new life in North Carolina, not even have lived there a day yet. I did not wish this to ever happen to anyone, as it was terrifying. But my advice is for you, don't be afraid to use your words, even if they offend the person. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I like to begin by describing myself, because I believe it's relevant to the story. I'm 25, male, and a bit above average height. I have been doing sports 5 to 6 times a week since I've graduated high school: gym, running, CrossFit, squash, swimming, and any team sport my friends decide to play at any given time. My favorite hobbies are mountaineering, hiking, and bouldering. I've just recently purchased a new pair of high-altitude mountaineering boots because it's near the end of the summer season and they were on sale. The plan is to wear them in the Alps next summer on a few ascents. I live in a European capital, one that's surrounded by wonderful nature with many trails and opportunities for hiking. I decided to break in my boots last Saturday, more specifically because it would have been my granddad's birthday, and he also loved hiking before he died. These boots are overkill for these woods, but I needed to try them. I selected a nice route that's around 25 kilometers and set off at about 9 in the morning. It rained just the day before, so I expected a fair amount of mud and not so many people, as they were easy scared off by the weather. Since the summer was extremely hot, it was a nice change of temperature, especially between trees and such, where it's a few degrees cooler than in the city. In the not so distant past, my dog would have definitely joined me on this hike, but she's turning 14 this year and she doesn't enjoy long distance walks anymore. My girlfriend had to do something for work on short notice, so I knew from the moment I woke up I would be doing the hike alone. The first half of the hike was perfect. The altitude difference along the trail is minimal, I barely broke a sweat, and I misjudged how many people would be out due to the storm the day before. I met at most 6 to 7 people during the first 2 to 3 hours, and most of them were cross-country runners. It's worth mentioning that I wasn't walking quickly. I stopped on many occasions to take pictures or study some animal tracks. There are deer and wild boars in these woods, nothing more menacing, not animals anyway, but I won't get ahead of myself. Between 12 and 1, the path ran into an actual road, one where cars can go. This road is asphalt, but deep in the forest and can only be used to reach certain landmarks that are also in the forest, so cars seldom go here. My trail required me to take this road for a few hundred meters. As I was walking along the road, I heard a car approach from behind me. It went past me, not too quickly or too slowly. It was an older, green SUV with a fresh registration. You could tell by the license plate. Probably an import. Anyway, I thought nothing of it at the time. Then I heard it come back. It drove me past for the second time, now very slowly, and I could clearly see 2 men sitting in the front seats, wearing baseball caps and sunglasses. Both had stubble beard game going on as well. I assumed they were gamekeepers, even though their cars have a crest on the hood and on both front doors. As I hike a fair amount, I know these things, I see them around quite a bit. They would also not be driving a car like this. They have Jeeps which are more suitable for the forest. Still, I felt no discomfort, and again, I thought nothing of it. Then, my trail left the asphalt road and began snaking in the woods again. I walked ahead serenely, gazing at trees and whatnot. Then, I suddenly had the strange sensation that something or someone was behind me. An engine sound was becoming more and more clear as well. At this point, the trail was quite narrow, but if, for whatever reason, you want to drive a car on it, you could, just about. Now when I turned around, the aforementioned SUV was basically in my face. It was an arm's length away from me, and it stopped just as I had. I looked at the driver, who was staring back, as I can only assume as he was wearing sunglasses. I calmly asked him, "What's wrong, shall I let you go?" in a polite tone as his window was rolled down. He didn't speak. He slowly started reversing, and he soon disappeared behind a curve. Now I was quite uncomfortable. I also noticed that he was alone in the car, unlike earlier. I listened intently, standing still since I wasn't sure what was going on. At this point, I was not scared, but there was a faint feeling of unease in the air, and bad thoughts began gathering in the back of my mind. I heard the car and the engine stop just behind the curve. I heard a door open and shut, but nothing from that point on. I turned around and began walking towards my destination, at a much faster pace than before. Now I was a bit scared. I didn't understand why he didn't answer, and why he just reversed and left without a word. I wasn't sure what to make of it, and I had no desire to ask him again, or to see him again for that matter. I had just walked enough for these unpleasant thoughts to slowly be erased from my mind. As I had been drinking a lot of water as I usually do, I decided to use the bathroom. I saw a perfect spot, a very narrow path off my trail that led quite clearly to a little hunting tower. I walked over to the tower, put my bag down by the ladder that led up to it, and began peeing. I was also interested in checking Google Maps to see where I was, but since there was no signal, I decided to check my map. I also had a sip of water. I had been camping there for a good few minutes before I headed back at the trail from where I deviated to pee. Right before I arrived back to the main trail, I thought to myself how extremely quiet it was. No wind, no noise of any kind, absolutely nothing. This made me realize, just a moment later, how alone I was. Except for the man who was standing maybe 50 meters away from me on the trail, in the direction where I was headed. I only saw this as soon as I stepped back on the trail, since the small one to the tower was well hidden by trees and you couldn't see the main trail, as it was running perpendicularly to the small one. I looked at him and I was instantly chilled to the very bone. He was dressed in tactical clothing, with a baseball hat on his head. The only reason he was standing still, I believe, was a moment of surprise that I had appeared from a place where he didn't expect me to appear from. At this point, I was fully and utterly alarmed. He was holding a rifle that had a scope on it. Had this happened without the incident with the SUV, I would have probably walked along the trail thinking he's a hunter. However, in light of the strange encounter with the SUV, from which the second man was missing, something in me snapped instantly. In hindsight, it's also illegal to hunt in these woods this time of year. I figured in the matter of 2 seconds that I was going to sprint through the woods until exhaustion, towards and past the tower, as it seemed natural to do at the time. If there was no malicious intent on this man's behalf, or the others, he'll just think I'm an idiot and forget about me in 2 minutes. If I'm right, it's the best call I will ever have made. He began running towards me. Adrenaline blossoming within me, I began sprinting away. I sprinted past the tower and deep into the bushes, not sparing my legs as I was wearing shorts and a thermal jumper. I crashed through branches, small trees, and slipped on several occasions. I really did sprint until I was exhausted. It must have been several kilometers. I even crossed some smaller trails but didn't even bother to look either way. My pulse was a billion the whole time. I began checking my phone for a signal, but nothing. I was already really angry at myself for not memorizing the license plate. After a while I began power walking, but still off trail straight ahead in a direction that I knew would sooner or later lead me out of the woods. When my phone got a signal, I told the story to several people frantically, but no one took me too seriously. They said I was overreacting and whatnot. You must have misunderstood the situation. Finally, I reached a trail that led directly to a cute little town that borders this rather large forest. It felt like an eternity, but I walked the last kilometer to the main square, took off my jumper and put it in my bag. At least I looked a little different from far away. I waited for a bus that took me back to the station near my car, rather anxiously. After the bus ride, during which I studied each car on the road, I walked back to my car, got in and drove home. My dog welcomed me like I was coming back from a 2-year deployment. Dogs are just amazing. She must have felt that something shook me up. The boots destroyed my feet, but they aren't meant to be sprinted in for long periods of time. I called the forest gamekeeper's office. I inquired about whether they have such cars in service as the one I come across. They do not. Their gamekeepers also don't typically work in pairs, like 99.9% of the time they are alone. I told them my story and they took me a lot more seriously than my friends, but they assured me that the police wouldn't. No one could have been legally hunting in the area during summer either. I've been reading local news but nothing extraordinary has been reported yet. I really hope nothing will be reported either. Gentlemen in the empty forest at lunchtime, let's not meet again. This happened a couple years ago. In 2016, I had just turned 18 and was in my second semester of community college. I was lucky to get to take a few specialized classes that were requirements for my major. These classes require me to drive about 45 minutes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to the main campus of my community college system. This is relevant because I was going to a town that I didn't know much about and didn't know anyone who lived there. There was a man in my class named Eddie. He was a big guy in his late 40s. We spent a lot of time in the lab for these classes, and he was stationed right across from me. I was a bit more naive and unsuspecting at the time and wanted to be nice, so I talked with him and my other classmates quite a bit. It was a lot friendlier to him than I would be nowadays. He started being overly friendly to me and would stand too close and ask too many personal questions. He'd flirt with me in class, to the point it seemed to make other people uncomfortable to watch. He also started staring at me a lot, with an intense look that scared me. Of course, being young and not wanting to hurt his feelings, I decided to ignore it as best as I could. I told my boyfriend about it, but again, Eddie hasn't actually done anything to me, so there wasn't a lot I felt like I could do. A few weeks after that started, all of us were hanging out in a small break room type area, studying for an exam in our next class, which was about 30 minutes away. I was sitting at one table chatting with some middle-aged women in my class, and Eddie was at the next table over messing with his phone. I noticed that I was going to get something from the vending machine and stood up. As I did, he tried and failed to discreetly turn his phone toward me and snapped pictures of me as I walked in the machine, got my drink, and bent over to pick it up. I realized what was going on as I was walking back to my seat, with him still taking photos, and I shot him a look. He put his phone away and just sat there staring at me. I was trying to look pissed, but honestly I was just really freaked out. I excused myself from the table and called my boyfriend near tears, telling him what happened. He was angry and said that I needed to tell someone, but I said no, I didn't want to make a scene. He tried to comfort me as much as he could, but I had to go to class soon afterwards. Our last class finished at about 9 p.m. and since it was January, it was completely dark out when we all walked to our cars. I was actually texting one of my guy friends about what had happened when Eddie walked up to my car, stopped for a second, and looked at me through my windshield, then slowly kept walking, watching me through my driver's side window the whole time. He was parked nowhere near me and the windshield was below zero, so he had to have made a point to walk by my car like that. I was terrified, and with my hands shaking, I started my car and drove home as fast as I could, calling my boyfriend on the way and crying. After that, I decided I needed to talk to my professor about what was going on. I was so nervous, but I asked her the next week if I could talk to her privately when class was over. We went to her office and I told her about Eddie and what he had done and how he acted weird toward me. She told me that she had noticed tensed up and went quiet when he got close to me, and had noticed paying a lot of attention to me, and told me she believed me about the pictures. She was honestly amazing with how she handled it. She promised me that she would move things around where I'd be away from him in the lab, and asked if I wanted her to talk to him about it. I said no, that I didn't want to make him angry, and she said that she'd respect that, but she was gonna have the security guard stand at the door and watch me go to my car every night, and that she'd tell the program director what was going on, but Eddie wouldn't know that I had talked to her. By the time we had got done, it had been around 30 minutes since class had ended, and she offered to walk me outside. I'm glad that she did, because when we came out the elevator to the first floor, Eddie was sitting there in the foyer alone. Everyone else had gone home. My blood ran cold, but I tried to act as normal as I could. He seemed as surprised to see her professor there as she was to see him. She asked why he was still here, and he said he noticed my car was still parked out front and wanted to make sure I didn't have to walk out by myself. I'm pretty sure I was as pale as a ghost, but my professor gave him a look that I couldn't read and said not to worry. She's walking me to my car from now on, and the security guard will be there every night. He said that was good and quickly said goodnight and left. It still chills me to think about what could have happened if my professor didn't walk me down to my car that night. I have no idea what he was capable of doing. After this, she rearranged our seating, made sure we were never grouped together, and I started making sure I walked out to my car at the same time as a few other women in my class. The security guard was usually in the foyer, and we only had a couple months left of class, so there weren't really any other incidents, but I still caught him staring at me sometimes and he looked like pure rage. It's been a few years, and I don't go to that school anymore, and I'm moving to a completely different city soon. But Eddie, let's not meet again. I recently ran into an old coworker from our time we worked at the sandwich shop in the truck stop. We chatted for a while before he had to leave, but I started thinking about my stint at that place, specifically the creepy sandwich guy. In college, I worked some overnights at the truck stop. It was a pretty safe place in a smaller town, and there had only been 3 incidents in the 4 years the place had been open before I got hired in. One trucker got robbed, one group of ladies arrested for servicing the truckers, and one OD. I was never really worried, even though my coworkers seemed a little concerned that I was a young girl working overnights at a truck stop when there was only one other employee in the whole place. Usually it was really slow. Most of the time I'd get 3 or 4 truckers come in within the first hour. A couple people came in with the munchies and ordered 3 dozen cookies one time, but usually it was maybe 1 or 2 people an hour, if that, so I'd spend about 3 hours cleaning ovens, finishing dishes, deep cleaning the lobby, that kind of thing. And then I get to spend whatever time between customers doing homework. The overnight boss on the other side, the gas station side, was cool as long as everything was cleaned and tipped regularly. A few weeks before I inevitably left this place, a guy came in about 20 minutes before my shift was over, so it's about 5 AM by this point. My coworker had arrived early so he could fill out some paperwork he had to get done, so he was sitting in the back office already. I started making this customer sandwich, making chit chat like usual. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He told me he was driving from New York to Wisconsin, asked me a little bit about how my night had been. Nothing crazy. I wrapped up his sub, rang it up, and threw in a small discount for him since he seemed nice and I was just happy I was getting ready to go home for a few hours of sleep before I headed to campus. When I went to take his change, things went wrong. He dropped the coins in my hand, but suddenly he had his grip tight around my wrist. The next thing I knew, I'm on the other side of the counter on the floor. He had yanked me across the counter and still had a tight grip around my wrist. Thank God my coworker was there. The manager on the other side had slipped into the bathroom, so to this guy's knowledge I was the only one there at the moment. But my coworker, while filling out his papers, was looking at the cameras and had seen everything. He was out of the back just seconds after I hit the ground, and before I really knew what was going on, he had chased the guy outside. He didn't pursue him far, afraid that someone else was nearby who would come after me. So he ran back inside, locked the door to our side of the store, and shouted to the manager to call the police. The cops came, they searched the area and watched the security videos, but nothing ever came from it. The guy disappeared and I never really heard anything about him. I put in my 2 weeks notice the following day after my nerves had calmed down. I was switched around so I worked during the day around my classes for my last few days, and they made it a policy that 2 people were to be working both sides of the truck stop on overnights from that point on. I still live about an hour and a half away from there, and honestly I haven't went back since my last day just because that memory is still in my mind almost 8 years later. So creepy sub guy, let's not meet again. This took place about 8 years ago. I had been single for a very long time. My kids kept telling me to get back into the swing of things, but I just kept making excuses. My nephew told me about this dating site. He said that there was no harm in talking to people, so I did it. I put everything out there so there were no surprises when or if they met me. I thought that if they still contacted me after reading all I had described myself and we matched, then maybe I would have coffee with them. I met with one gentleman who was way too regimental for my crazy life and kindly declined any more involvement with him. Another guy seemed too pushy and acted like I should be honored to be in his presence, but then there came, we will call him Richard. Now please keep in mind I had very low self-esteem at the time. That being said, Richard seemed great. We carried on conversations for hours. He lived an hour and a half away, so all we could really do was talk to each other. We talked about our kids, dreams, goals. My daughter even friended one of his sons on Facebook. I was a secretary for some self-help meetings in my town, and he was going to school to be a counselor. Perfect, right? We talked for at least 4 months, but after a while, I noticed that he kept having small problems come up. Arguments with his mom with whom he was living, no money for gas, his truck broke down, his oldest boy was mad at him, just little things, you know? Not anything that would set me off, but it was his poor me to heck with it attitude. I tried to let that go and really be a positive influence in his life. His mother and boys loved me and told me that they had never seen him so happy. Time went on and we were still talking every day. I had an opportunity to come see him, and of course, my daughter went with me so she could meet his son in person as well. I took him and his son out to eat at the only little coffee shop in that town. He knew I was on a fixed income, but I paid anyway because he was going to school and didn't have an income as of yet. We had a good time. We met at his son's house in a hilltop town. We were having such a good time that we didn't notice that the snow was coming down hard and the roads were icing up, so my daughter and I stayed the night in one of the rooms. It seemed like the closer we got to his family, the more distant they became to him. It was odd. The next day the roads were clear, so we said our goodbyes and went home, but before we left, I received one extra hug from his son's mother-in-law. She whispered in my ear, "Don't fall for him." I thought that maybe there was something she didn't like about me. That came out of the left field. The next few days we didn't talk. I thought that was odd. Did I do something wrong? Someone from the self-help meeting told me that there was a man looking for me. She said he looked disheveled and smelled like alcohol. This wasn't a surprise to me because I helped quite a few people get back on their feet, and maybe this one fell off the wagon and just needed to talk. As I was driving down my street, I saw a truck in my driveway I didn't recognize at first. It was him. He found out where I lived and was sitting in the front of my house. At first I was happy until I looked in his truck and saw him slumped over reeking of booze. At that point my fixed mode set in and I asked him in for some strong coffee. He told me that he had a blowout with his mother and she kicked him out and his boys won't talk to him. I got him some clean clothes and told him to take a shower. I figured we could sort it out the next day. In the meantime I was taking him to a meeting. He sobered up and agreed to go, but the whole time at the meeting my friends were acting like I had lost my mind. Did they see something I was blind of? He went back to my house and he seemed okay, almost too okay like nothing at all happened. My son pulled me aside and told me he didn't like him much, but I thought that maybe he was just being overprotective. I should have paid more attention. We went to the store because I wasn't prepared for the extra mouth, and I bought 4 2-liters of soda, a gallon of milk, and 2 monsters for both of him and my son, some chips and other things for dinner. After we ate, we all watched some TV and headed off to bed. I let him sleep on the spare bed in my room, but in the middle of the night, he tried to get frisky. At that point, no. My grown kids were in the other room and something just didn't sit well with me. Like he wasn't the same man he was before. The next morning, my daughter came running out of the bathroom angry. She said in a loud voice, "Someone peed all over the toilet." He didn't say a word. Later, we were all eating breakfast and he started to let food drop out of his mouth onto the table and floor and was spitting food while he was talking. He took 3 2-liters and drank them back to back, letting some run down his chin. Then, yes there is more, he took the remote and started to set future recordings for his favorite shows and deleting a few of my grandchildren's. He set recordings for weeks in advance. Wait, what are you doing, my friend? This is not cool. I told him, but he acted like I said nothing. Then he went to the refrigerator and told me that I had to go to the store and buy more soda and stuff because it was all gone. Like it was gone. He even drank my son's Monster and the whole gallon of milk. One day, mind you, only one. At this point, my daughter was also livid, so she contacted his son and he proceeded to tell her that Richard's mother kicked him out because he wouldn't get a job and was stealing money and eating her out of house and home. His other son won't talk to him because he keeps asking for money and won't pay it back. He himself was mad at him for lying to me by telling him that he was going to school when he wasn't and using me as his next big meal ticket. Well, that was it. I got all of his stuff together and took it to his truck and asked him to leave. It doesn't end there. He had loosened some bolts on his transmission, making it impossible to move. He begged and pleaded for me to let him stay. He was at that point snot was coming out of his nose. He said that he just wanted to be close to me and if that meant sleeping in his truck, he would do that and he couldn't live without me. Well no, I called his oldest son and told him that if they didn't come with a tow truck and get their dad, his fate was not going to be nice. They arrived 2 hours later apologizing for their father's actions. We found out that through his son that for many years he had gone through quite a few unhealthy relationships and took advantage of a lot of women that fell for his lies. He still tries to friend me on Facebook to this day. When I was 16 years old, I decided to surprise my parents with a bouquet of flowers for Valentine's Day. We've always celebrated this as a family holiday rather than a romantic one. I didn't have a car to drive to a florist, but my high school was within walking distance of a hospital boasting a gift shop that sells floral arrangements. Between classes during the week of Valentine's Day, I set off for the hospital by my lonesome, cutting across campus to walk through a network of side roads populated with specialty doctors' offices that kept odd hours. The sort of buildings where traveling doctors mainly hold surgery consultations or perform small procedures a few times a month. The trip there passed without incident. As I was walking back through said deserted roads with a vase of flowers in a tow, I noticed an unkept 1990s car close behind me. While my memory of the car is hazy, I am left with the impression that there were at least 2 men within whose faces I could not see. Initially, I assumed that the driver was simply afraid of hitting me, the reason they weren't passing by, so I made a point of dramatically trudging further into the grassy shoulder of the road, demonstrating to them that they could drive safely ahead. They still refused to pass me by, continuing to creep along behind at a slow pace. Beginning to suspect that the driver was more interested in me than a destination, I began to walk faster. The car confirmed my suspicions by matching my speed. Despite the impracticality of my shoes and the threat of spilling water from my vase, I commenced to run as fast as I possibly could. They hit the gas and again matched my speed. I realized at this point that the car was following me, that there was no one in sight to notice, and I needed to get away. I bolted into the first parking lot that I saw. The car turned in after me. Despite there being only 2 or 3 cars in the spacious front parking lot and there being no other set of activity at the office, this car did not stop to park in the numerous spaces available there. The driver instead opted to pursue me in the partially under construction back portion of this lot, behind the office. It passed every available parking space to corner me against a pile of debris and rubble from the construction, coming to a diagonal stop less than 3 feet away. Before anyone could emerge from the vehicle, I somehow managed to scale the small prominence of rubble against my back. Base in hand, it jumped from its peak to land painfully on the other side, which fortunately was a plot of undeveloped land within sight of my high school campus. I took a quick peek back over my shoulder to see if they were still in pursuit, but the car had sped off after it reached the top of the rubble pile and was nowhere in sight. They had not parked in the lot at all. They had no business there. The driver was following me. I sprinted at top speed and didn't stop until I was soaked with sweat in the dead of winter and panting in the student lounge among my classmates, who didn't seem to care when I told them. In retrospect, I should have told an adult, alerted campus security, and called the non-emergency line at the local police station, but I was young, foolish, insecure, and afraid of getting in trouble for leaving campus when I didn't have a signed permission from permitting me to do so. I kept trying to convince myself that I had misread the situation or was overreacting. I don't know what I would have even told the police had I called them, as I was entirely ignorant of the subject of cars and I couldn't have identified the make of it if I had been asked, and I couldn't see the faces of the occupants. I was also worried that my parents would restrict my already extremely limited freedoms if they knew I had been in any danger. Whoever followed and tried to trap a 16-year-old girl with flowers at a doctor's office just before Valentine's Day of 2016, let's not meet again. So when I was in probably 2nd or 3rd grade, we had an early dismissal. For those of you who don't know, that's when school goes for longer than half a day, but we still get out an hour or so early. I remember sitting silently in class working on math problems when the phone rang. I joked to my friend next to me that I hoped it was for me. We all watched the teacher answer the phone because we knew that 90% of the time it meant someone was leaving class. When the teacher's eyes met with mine, I suddenly got pretty worried. My teacher said something into the phone and then asked me, "When are you getting off the bus today?" I thought this was really weird. My mom knew I would be getting home because she had to leave work early so she'd be home when I got home. I just told the teacher the normal time. The teacher talked for a few more seconds and then hung up the phone. I asked her what it was about and she told me that my parent just wanted to double check what time I got off the bus. I didn't really think about it too much for the rest of the day. Later I got off the bus and walked home without incident. When I walked in the front door, my mom asked me about my dad and took my coat. I remember the look on her face when I asked her, "Why did you call the school to see what time I was getting off the bus?" She looked shocked. She said that she hadn't called the school. I told her the whole story and she immediately started making frantic phone calls. I knew that something was wrong. I watched some TV while my mom talked. About 20 minutes later, my stepdad came home early from work. About 10 minutes after that, a state trooper pulled up. I was pretty scared because I thought that somehow I was in trouble. The state trooper asked me a few questions like, "Has anyone tried to talk to you while you've walked from the bus stop? Have you seen anyone parked at the bus stop who didn't have a kid get into their car? Has anyone tried giving you a ride?" The answer to all of his questions was no. I had never seen anyone suspicious as we lived in a pretty nice neighborhood and it was mostly old retired folk who live around us. My mom asked me to go upstairs to pack my bag as it was my dad's weekend for visitation. When my dad got there to pick me up, he was questioned pretty heavily by the state trooper. I had been eavesdropping from upstairs. My mom called me back down and I left with my dad for the weekend. My dad ended up teaching some basic self-defense, which I thought was pretty cool. I never heard anything about the situation and eventually I forgot about it. Fast forward to today. I was watching a horror movie when I then remembered the whole incident. I asked my mom about it and what she told me chilled me to the core. She told me that someone had called my school posing as my dad. This man knew my dad's full name, my full name, and my mom's full name. He kept saying that my mother wanted him to pick me up from the bus stop because she wasn't going to be able to leave work early. The school didn't even bother calling my mother. I believe that the only thing that saved me from being abducted was the fact that I had told the man that I'd be getting off the bus at the normal time, which was around 3:15. I had actually gotten off the bus at around 1:45. So creepy guy who wanted to abduct me, let's not meet. For context, I am a 19-year-old girl and was taking summer classes at a community college this summer. One of the classes I took was public speaking, which met Tuesdays and Thursdays. This guy, I don't even know his name, immediately gave off weird vibes. To get from our classroom that was on the 2nd floor, he had to go down a hallway, down a stairwell to the 1st floor, through the main lobby, and out the sliding doors. He started waiting for me after class and followed me all the way down this route to my car. Didn't matter if I pretended to be on the phone, had both earbuds in, kept my head down, literally power walked away from him, gave him bare minimum responses, etc. He would wait for me, follow me / try to walk with me, and the whole way would be talking to me and asking me questions. Like asking me about each of the cars I drove to the school, since my family has to share cars. Even after I suddenly dropped I had a boyfriend, so he definitely knows my car. I got a very bad feeling after a while of this happening and told the class's professor. She immediately took it seriously, notified camp security, and told me to always stay after class so she could walk me to my car. However, true to form, the guy stopped showing up to class for at least 2 weeks or so I thought it was fine and that the crisis was averted. And it was, until one day he showed up to class again. As soon as I saw him enter the room, my heart dropped. During this class, I slipped a note to my professor telling her he's the kid in the blue shirt, and she told me to hang around after class. I did, and so did the guy and another female student. Before he tried to talk to the professor about why he should pass the class despite never showing up or doing the work, the professor asked me and the other girl to wait in the hall. From the hall, we could hear him yelling aggressively at the professor. He eventually left and came out into the hallway we were waiting in and pointed at me and said, "Wait for me." Mind you, I have no idea who this kid is. I instantly got the creeps and rushed back into the room to tell my professor, who was equally creeped out. Having overheard our conversation, the other female student came back into the room approximately 10 minutes later and told me and the professor that the guy was just standing in the hall waiting for me. The professor called campus security multiple times, phoned the front desk multiple times, but she received no responses. So we took it to our own hands and came up with a plan to leave the classroom together, pretending to be in a very deep conversation with each other, walked past the guy without even looking at him, and walked down the stairwell to the main lobby. His eyes bored into us as we passed him, and we entered the stairwell. He stood up and followed us. The professor and I exchanged looks of terror but kept her cool act up, stopping at the main desk in the lobby and pretending to converse with the secretary. The guy passed us, still staring at us, and walked out the sliding doors where he was out of our field of vision. We literally had to track down the campus security ourselves and tell them everything that had happened, and my professor was furious. After we saw security camera footage of him lurking around, she contacted the local police because she and I both had that very strong gut feeling that this kid was not right and that we weren't safe around him. So that public speaking class was from 3 to 5 p.m. and I had another class from 6 to 8 p.m. So I would usually drive to Wawa or something in that hour gap. However, there was no way I was going anywhere because I knew the guy was waiting for me to do so. For over an hour me, the professor, security, and secretary, tried to figure out who this kid was. None of us knew his name because he literally didn't come to class, there weren't photo IDs next to the class roster, and approximately half the original class stopped showing up so we couldn't use process of elimination. All we had was the security footage of him. I was escorted to and from my next class into my car at the end of the night. The security officer asked me to point out my car, and when I did, he said, "Oh wow, so he was parked right next to you." Confused, I asked what he meant and he told me that he had been watching more security footage and the guy got into the car parked right next to me, waited in there for a long time, and then eventually left. The thing is, I knew for a fact that I hadn't parked next to anyone when I arrived at the school because the lot was practically empty since it was summer. After finally getting home that night, I was the only person home for a few weeks, go figure. Local police did drive-bys by my home all night in a well check. When I returned to the school 2 days later for my Thursday classes, I was informed of chilling information. Footage showed him waiting for me in his car on Tuesday after our shared class, which I had already been told, but it also showed him coming back to the parking lot at around 8 p.m. when my last class got out and sitting in his car. I never told him about my schedule or any other classes I was taking. This whole time, my public speaking professor was filing reports, making complaints against the school for their incompetency, and even got a lawyer because she felt so uneasy about the kid that if he showed up again, she would walk out. I was in contact with the president of the entire college, the director of security of the entire college, police, etc. for days. They told me that he was banned from campus and everyone was on watch for him, and that if he was spotted he would be asked to leave. Until the director of campus security, middle-aged man, called me and told me that he identified the kid and talked to him, via telephone call mind you, and he told me that the guy, and I quote, just wanted to be my friend, and told me that whatever I was doing with the guy, you know, literally running away from him, probably made him think I was flirting with him. My professors were absolutely furious and excused me from physically attending class for the rest of the semester. I still don't know his name, and I hope I never have to learn it. My New Year resolution 2012 was to get in shape again. After my first kid was born, I lost my athletic interest, but I had every intention of getting it back. So I started running 4 days a week with my friend Hannah, who is a great runner slash motivator. We would run after work, 5 to 10 kilometers, usually favoring the forest trail. It's the kind of trail that got lighting in the darker months of the year, so you could run there anytime really. Once you turn on the lights, you got 45 minutes to run the shorter trails, and longer to run the longer ones. Then the lights shut off automatically. We had been running for about 2 months when we started seeing the same man hanging around the parking lot every time we got there. Thin man, 25 to 30 years of age, always dressed in sports clothes but never actually running. He never looked you in the eye either. We speculated that he could be homeless camping nearby because he was constantly there. We got used to seeing him, sitting somewhere close by, silently and always on his own. We felt sorry for him. He never seemed to talk to anyone or interact at all, but there was something about him that made us hesitate to talk to him or ask if he was okay. Can't pinpoint what it was, but something wasn't completely right with him. One evening, Hannah didn't make it to our run and I decided to go on my own. I arrived at the parking lot, my car being the only car there. I did some stretching, turned on the lights, and set off on the 5-kilometer trail. I hadn't seen the thin, silent man when I started my run. Perhaps it was getting too cold to sit there now since it was autumn, dark, and getting closer to the freezing point. He must have been here though, somewhere in the shadows, because when I got to the top of the first steep hill, I could hear heavy breathing somewhere behind me. I look over my shoulder and I see him. He is running like a man obsessed. In regular shoes, not running shoes, with his arms moving in a really strange, stiff manner as he was made of metal. His hands like arrows, straight in an upward-inward angle, sort of like a sprinter but more extreme, moving like a robot. He had never done anything to harm me, or anyone else as far as I knew, but the look in his eyes alone was enough to let me know that I needed to go. I started running faster, trying to create distance between us, and I could hear his heavy breathing getting even more strained. I ran like my life depended on it, adrenaline pumping through my body and giving me new strength. I tore off my necklace and threw it on the ground thinking, I must leave a trace if he takes me, something must be left behind. I tried screaming, hoping someone would be close enough to hear me, but I couldn't scream my lungs out and keep up the phase at the same time. He was still behind me, maybe 100 meters behind now, but I figured that if I trip and fall, or run out of energy, or fumble with the car keys once I reach the parking lot, then I'm screwed. So once I reached the sharp turn on the trail, I went off the trail and ran straight into the dark woods. I ran only a short distance and then I laid down flat on my stomach, my hands searching for a rock to defend myself with if he found me. I realized that I was wearing bright running clothes with reflexes and neon coloring. I had ever felt so visible in the dark before. I could hear him reach the turn and thankfully he kept on running. I started to move slowly and as silently as possible move further into the darkness. My heart sank again as soon as I heard rapid footsteps closing in from the trail. He realized that I must have got off the trail once he saw that there was no sign of me ahead. He stopped and I stopped. I could imagine him listening for any sound and I held my breath and prayed to make him go away. After a while I heard him say something in a language I didn't recognize and walk off. I didn't move. I feared that he would wait for me by the car and realized that I had to get off the trail and onto the main road and stop someone. I couldn't go back to the parking lot. I started to make my way further into the woods, knowing that I would eventually end up on the last part of the long trail and close to the main road. The lights on the trail suddenly shut off. That made me calmer at first. The dark was a comfort and protection, but then after only a few moments it switched on again. This could mean that another person had just started their run and soon I would have someone there to help me, or that he was out looking for me. I decided against waiting to find out and continued my way towards the main road. It was dark and I fell multiple times, my clothes getting wet from the damp vegetation and I started to get cold. After what felt like a lifetime, I could see the 10-kilometer trail ahead and I knew I was close to the main road. Soon I could hear the traffic. Once I made it to the road, I must have looked like I had been in a terrible accident. Blood from several small cuts from the falling and my clothes dirty. My bright runner's shirt soon attracted the attention of a passing car. My waving and desperate shouting made it stop. The driver, a 40-ish man with his 2 kids in the back seat, spent the next 10 minutes or so trying to make sense of what I tried to say between the sobbing and the crying. He asked if I wanted to lift back to the parking lot and I told him no, please take me home instead. At home, my husband insisted on going to the parking lot to retrieve the car and calling the police. My husband went back for the car. The driver's seat window was smashed and my phone was gone. So was the photo of my daughter that had been hanging from the mirror. I don't know what he was trying to do or why he chased me the way he did, but the look in his eyes, there was no doubt he had bad intentions. So creepy forest trail man, let's never meet again. This is a story from when I was 18. I'm 25 now. My mom and I were regular attendees of our local church. We both attended different midweek groups. I met with some of the younger ones, and my mom went to one with some of the middle-aged people. Anyway, my mom's group was about half a mile from our house, and we didn't own a car, so she would often walk there on her own. For the 7:30 start, this was fine in summers because it wasn't getting dark until around 9ish. When her group ended at 10, she would call me and I would start walking/running to meet her to walk her home. We would usually meet not too far away from her group, but we would always stay on the phone until we met. On the night in question, all was usual. She called, I got my trainers on, and locked the house and began jogging to meet her. I usually ran because it was good training for my rugby. In order to meet my mom, I had to cross up her local park and go through a dark patch of trees behind some of the local houses. It was usually just before these trees that we met. Anyway, I'm running and my mom's walking. We are talking about her evening and who was there when she suddenly says, Joe, hurry up, I think someone's following me. My heart rate goes through the roof and I start to panic, so I start sprinting still with some way to go until I meet her. I tell her to stay calm and keep her updated on my position. My mom is tough but short. I hear my mom scream through the phone and also hear it in the distance ahead. Get away from me, what do you want? I don't have any money and you can have my phone if you want. This panicked me. I ran like I had never run before. The distance I had to cover usually took me a good 45 to 60 seconds to run, but I did it so much faster. By now I can see them in the distance. My mom's screams were piercing through me. I could see the guy has her by the hair and is dragging her about. She was fighting him all the way. I shouted get off of my mom and charged in. He was tall and lean but had hardly any weight to him. What happened next is something of a blur, and only through me and my mom talking about it have we come to some conclusion on what really happened. And the guy's injuries, of course. He saw me and immediately let go of her. She fell to the ground sobbing and tried to run. I caught him fairly easy and took him to the ground hard. My mom says I took him clean off the ground before smashing his head/shoulder into the ground. He grunted and we rolled, but I beat him up. It's at this point that I blank out, but apparently I hopped over the guy, headbutted him, and repeatedly beat his face. Someone from the houses behind had heard the screams and called the police. One guy from the street was a policeman and had come out to investigate. I remember him dragging me off the guy, and it was then that I saw the blood and scratch marks on my arms. He had clawed me, but I hadn't noticed it. The police arrived quickly and we had to be interviewed by them, which is all still a bit blurry. Apparently the off-duty cop had thought I was the attacker, as I suppose anyone would have seen me beat up the guy. The guy was on their records as a thief. He had mugged a girl in town not that long before. When police interviewed him, he claimed that he was just robbing her, but I'm not sure. He's in prison now, thankfully. You never think of bad stuff will happen to the ones you love until it happens. So, guy who attacked my mom, let's not ever meet again. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.